Chapter 8:12. The battle was intense and short, and lasted for roughly half an hour, but in that half an hour, Go Qing Wendao had suffered heavy losses, losing around 30 silver-grade warships, and 123 bronze-grade warships, with a death toll of 15,000 men. A portion of them were burned alive in the warships. Master bought them so cheaply, it truly is a huge profit. That's right, how can I compare to Master in doing business? The only thing that surprised him was the might of the star treasures in the Sea of Energy. Go Qing Wendao suddenly realized that he was stuck in a dilemma. No one has realized this yet other than me. Impart your training experience in Heaven's Road to them, they already possess good tactics, and once their individual strength increases, they will quickly form their own fighting capabilities. It was actually able to pose a threat to warships. But the feeling this time was completely different. He felt as though he was cutting into a pile of cotton or cutting into water. It was extremely sluggish. All of the large-scale siege boats were incinerated, and not only that, even the medium-scale siege boats were almost completely destroyed. Go Qing Wendao was enraged and attacked on all fronts. But what he did not expect was that the mysterious army did not retreat, but instead relied on the wreckage of the siege boats to attack them. The situation of the battlefield confirmed Bing's prediction. He walked out of the ward quietly. The ordinary soldiers of the Honorable Martial Alliance only knew that the D continent had spirit objects, but Go Qing Wendao knew that the Shang continent's spirit objects were star treasures that came from Heaven's Road. What made Go Qing Wendao want to vomit blood was that the army also had a star treasure. The intense battlefield was filled with wreckage. But he did not expect that the ripples from the battle had only just begun to spread out. He was a lunatic, but an intelligent lunatic. Go Qing Wendao did not find it strange that the army was proficient in using star treasures. The higher-ups of the Honorable Martial Continent had long investigated Tang Tian's background, and it was normal for the Southern Alliance to be proficient in using star treasures. Xie Yuan's ears could not hear anything. The intense explosion and impact had caused him to lose his hearing. But he waved his arms with all his might, shouting out words that he did not know, encouraging the soldiers, encouraging himself. Xie Yuan's eyelashes fluttered in his sleep and he slowly opened his eyes. Sunlight shone in through the window, shining on his face, making him feel warm. Felt like a lifetime ago. He had the same dream for the past few days. Every time he woke up, his chest would be filled with inexplicable sadness. He was like an extremely sharp blade that only attacked and did not defend. He did not care how many times he was slashed by the enemy, but no one could block his blade. Therefore, from the start of the battle, the 4 southern island tribes gave him a huge surprise. You don't have to worry too much about army tactics, because the Sacred Saint Galaxy's battle style is destined to be changed by star treasures. Don't think that I'm exaggerating the use of the secret treasure. Please believe in the eyes of a general who has experienced the cruelest of battles. The shape of the war would not remain the same forever. On the contrary, any variable could change it. And secret treasures are such a variable. What made Go Qing Wendao feel even more sullen was that it was not them who forced the enemies to retreat, but the enemies who took the initiative to retreat. What made him want to vomit blood was that the enemy had chosen to retreat into the Ocean Guardian stronghold. The star treasure is in Heaven's Road because of the problem with the concentration of energy, its might is greatly weakened. But in the Sacred Saint Galaxy, there is an endless supply of extremely dense energy, and its might will increase to an unprecedented level. Under the flickering light auras from the explosions, the trembling scene became silent. Xie Yuan, who was in a frenzied state, was extremely calm. His thoughts drifted and the past was like smoke. No stronghold was able to defend against 22 large-scale siege boats. But the Southern Alliance did it miraculously. Go Qing Wendao frowned. The battle had ended, but he knew that he would never be able to forget it for the rest of his life. In other words, they had started to think about tactics. The light auras from the explosions would occasionally illuminate the stronghold ruins. Even if he could not hear it, even if everyone else could not hear it. The enemies were extremely proficient in fighting in the Sea of Energy, and had obviously gone through specialized training which surprised Go Qing Wendao. In the Sea of Energy, it was the world of warships. Without the protection of warships, the pervasive energy corrosion was enough to destroy any army. Even pirates would not go and train to fight in the Sea of Energy. Furthermore, a person's fighting ability was not worth mentioning in front of a warship. The long-distance training in the Sea of Energy continuously raised their strength, and killing the pirates along the way gave them even more opportunities to train. It is a pity that I am unable to become a gold-rank battle general. The large-scale siege boats that were unable to move upon being approached by the enemies, they would immediately become live targets. The soldiers frantically threw the remaining star treasures into the battle. The star treasures that were usually more precious than their lives were violently detonated. One after another, the sinister and crazy young faces were already filled with tears. They were unwilling to part with them. There were very few places in the Sea of Energy where they could find cover, and the majority of them were vast and chaotic energy flows. The warships had difficulty moving forward, but Go Qing Wendao remained unmoved. Although the destruction of the 22 large-scale siege boats made him furious, but he had the advantage in numbers. After inspecting the last soldier, he looked around. Many of the beds were empty, and the familiar faces mixed with the scenes of the past surfaced in his eyes. In the past, they were just a small army in charge of security. One spirit object was enough to buy their entire army, and even after so long, they were still a group of country bumpkins. He did not know that at that moment on the other side of the battlefield, Crane also thought about Bing's words. He realized that he had truly underestimated the Southern Alliance. Since the start of the war, there had been many bumps, and there were unspeakable awkwardness, as the other party would always appear at unexpected places and suddenly strike him. It was different from any battle that he had experienced in the past. Other enemies would naturally have places that made him feel fear. But to Go Qing Wendao, who believed in "you fight your own battles, I'll fight mine," it did not affect him much. Even Go Qing Wendao, who viewed human lives as grass, upon seeing the casualty report, his eyes could not help but twitch. If there were any large-scale siege boats, it would be extremely easy to take down the stronghold ruins. But all of the siege boats were destroyed. On the long bench under the sunlight, tears flowed down his face. A small local army that was bought over, a middle-aged yet unknown and hesitant general, an added bonus to the business. The large-scale siege boats were the size of strongholds, while the middle-scale siege boats were the size of small mountains, and the battlefield was filled with wreckage. Go Qing Wendao's fleet was unable to display their full potential in the complicated terrain, but the enemy was able to use the wreckage as a cover to launch wave after wave of attacks. Xie Yuan defended the Ocean Guardian stronghold for a full 6 hours, and destroyed close to half of the large-scale siege boats. Just as Go Qing Wendao thought that victory was at hand, Crane led the Star Treasure Army and suddenly rushed into the battlefield. They did not dare to have any extravagant hopes. They did not dare to have extravagant beliefs. At that time they were muddle-headed and wasted their youth. I never thought that the Southern Alliance would actually have such training. Could it be that they had long anticipated such a situation? Go Qing Wendao personally saw a few warships being destroyed and had a bad premonition. The situation of the battlefield once again surprised Go Qing Wendao. The enemy was actually extremely agile in the Sea of Energy. Upon contact, the honorable martial army, who had the advantage in numbers, immediately suffered a large number of casualties. Who still remembers the group of country bumpkins? Who still remembers the Shuang Fei Yan of the past? The four families grew up in the sacred Saint Galaxy, and were outstanding in tactics, and teamwork had long become their instinct. After their individual strength received a huge increase, Crane realized to his surprise that even without his supervision, they automatically started to think about how to work together, and how to unleash a greater might. The area that was filled with wreckage and countless of fire regiments had become a death zone. Do you know what that means? That means that a powerful single soldier equipment has appeared. Its appearance is extremely likely to break the current army model of the sacred Saint Galaxy. What I am saying is not that the army will leave the stage of history, but that the future army will be even more agile and pay more attention to individual strength. When a single soldier equipment was used, it allowed an individual's strength to pose a threat to a warship, and it also possessed the agility that warships did not have. And when the soldiers that possessed it did not fight alone, but were equally passionate about teamwork, its might would immediately erupt. The Ocean Guardian stronghold was almost blasted into ruins. Out of the 5 southern island families, other than the Aries constellation, the other 4 were all under Crane. Crane did not hide anything when he was in Heaven's Road. He was familiar with the classics and was extremely knowledgeable, although he did not train in them, but he still knew a lot of theories. But the strongest was still the Sagittarius constellation, since the Empress of Sagittarius constellation was his aunt, and he himself was viewed as the most likely successor of Sagittarius constellation. The Battle of the Ocean Guardian stronghold shook the entire world. But the ruins of the stronghold was also a tough bone, and Xianxia had completely remodeled the Ocean Guardian stronghold. Including the internal structure of the stronghold, they were all changed and strengthened. Even though the exterior of the stronghold was completely destroyed, all of the battle positions were destroyed, but the internal structure was still intact. It was a battle that could be recorded in the annals of history, and the degree of bitterness caused the entire Sacred Saint Galaxy to be speechless. 22 large-scale sieging frigates, such a terrifying formation, was enough to cause any famous general to feel despair and even surrender. He was indifferent to the casualties on the battlefield, but squinted his eyes and carefully observed the battlefield. Looking from afar, the battlefield looked as though there were many bonfires floating. It was a spectacular sight. But he did not regret it at all. He sat up and wore his shoes, then patrolled the sick room. The sick room was filled with his soldiers. The swift army had suffered heavy losses, far more than any of the previous times. The entire army was left with less than a fifth of the survivors, and even these survivors were not in one piece. Warships after warships exploded one after another, and were engulfed by the raging flames. Guoqing Wendao immediately gave the order to disembark and fight. Xianxia quietly patrolled the soldiers who were sleeping soundly on the sickbeds, his movements extremely gentle. Guoqing Wendao shook his head. The scene in front of him was a coincidence. If not for the wreckage facing the terrifying and concentrated attacks of the fleet, the armies would have been destroyed in the blink of an eye. Chapter 8:13. Such pessimistic thoughts filled everyone's hearts. The war was so out of balance. The southern domain was like a child facing an adult, powerless to fight back. If it wasn't for the fact that this arrow was extraordinary, Wei Tingting would definitely refuse to use it. To Guoqing Wendao, who had sufficient manpower, it was not a problem. However, as soon as a warship approached, it would be attacked. Wei Tingting and the rest hid in the wreckage, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. It had a very strange name, Divine Gold Arrow, also known as Neurotic Arrow. Wei Tingting's face flushed red. Master Crane was the dream lover of almost all ladies. When Kong of the Sin Gate did not know that the crucial point of the war had already appeared. He was also immersed in his own description. The entire sentry post was deathly silent. The terrible performance of the southern region's factions had plunged the people into despair. From the moment they received the request for help to the moment they set off, Master Crane's decisiveness was shocking, and it was impossible for anyone to associate him with his usual delicate and gentle demeanor. They arrived at the fortress earlier than expected. Master Crane suppressed everyone's desire to fight, and hid behind the Ocean Guardian stronghold like an experienced hunter, waiting for the most opportune moment to strike. Wei Tingting's face did not have the slightest hint of immaturity of a new recruit, only the calmness of a veteran. The war bow was placed in the most comfortable position in his hand, and the specially made black gold arrow was nocked on the bowstring. The black gold arrow was forged from black gold. The translucent black arrow feathers were compressed into thin black gold flakes, and the body of the arrow was covered in dark golden patterns. But the one who truly appeared out of nowhere was Crane. After witnessing the suffocating 6-hour battle, the densely packed war beasts, the incessant roars of the flames of war, and the terrifying turbulence of energy, the people were shrouded in fear and despair. Such an eclectic taste and style simply made people look up to him. Master Crane never spoke loudly. His voice was clear and bright, always so confident. He was always so calm and composed, elegant and graceful. Even when he gave the order to attack, he was still holding his sword and walking calmly, so handsome that it was dazzling. The remaining wreckage of the battleship was the hardest part of the battleship. Anything that could be burned would have long turned into ashes. Ordinary attacks from warships could leave terrifying scars on them, but they could not destroy their structure. The best way to clean up this area was to use the warships to drag the wreckage away. Suddenly, a strange sound startled everyone, and everyone seemed to wake up from a dream. The burning southern domain began to show its determination and will to the saints. The orderly retreat, the charge and the infiltration were enough to prove that this was a battle general with an ice-cold mind. Wei Tingting's eyes were like water as she observed the enemy's movements. This battle had many aspects that could not be replicated, but under such terrifying attacks he had persisted for a whole 6 hours. Whether it was his level of defense or his will to fight, they had made him the strongest defensive general in the sanctuary, and his reputation had even surpassed the other two. At that time there were countless of scouts spying on the Ocean Guardian stronghold from afar, and the battle attracted the attention of the entire Sacred Saint Galaxy. The entire process of the battle was recorded by the scouts of each clan. These images were like a hurricane exploding in the sanctuary in a very short time. But when the video of the battle spread, it began to show its power. From Xie Yuan's amazing feat to Crane's sudden appearance, everyone realized that the Southern Alliance was not as weak as everyone thought. Adding Bai Yu, the Southern Alliance already had 3 top-grade battle generals. Everyone was shocked at the Southern Alliance's talents, and felt that the Southern Alliance was even more mysterious. How many more geniuses are hidden in the Southern Alliance? The mercenary army only recognizes money. How can they be so fearless? The Southern Alliance's reputation in the southern region reached an unprecedented height, especially among the commoners. More than half of the southern region citizens felt that only the Southern Alliance could stop the honorable Martial Continent. That extremely cruel and tragic battle was more convincing than any words could be. But what use is that? It was only a matter of time. The honorable Martial Continent's army was like a hot knife through butter, sweeping through everything. The southern region was like a wooden house that had long rotted, and with a light push from the honorable Martial Continent, it would collapse. But when they witnessed the sudden appearance of reinforcements, the fearless ambush, the retreat, the return, the repeated fights, the tenacious determination to fight emerged from the wreckage, striking their hearts. This strange name caused Wei Tingting to be dumbstruck, and after hearing it a few times she thought that she had heard wrongly. And the logistics department's explanation was that the God Gold Arrow was the short form of the godlike Black Gold Arrow. This explanation caused everyone to be even more shocked. In the battle, the people who attracted the most attention were Xie Yuan and Crane. Mo Xan knew that he was in trouble. Wei Tingting thought about the joke that everyone was talking about, and her mouth could not help but curve. Countless of people started to prepare their belongings, and stepped onto the ship towards the Shang continent. The southern region was burning. Countless of people had tears streaming down their faces. The fear and despair that enveloped their entire bodies was incinerated by the boiling blood and flames. What sound is that? The reason why the neurotic arrows were so powerful was not because every arrow was infused with a living spirit, but because every arrow was infused with a lunatic. But when they witnessed the Ocean Guardian stronghold being engulfed by the explosions, the fearless counterattack, the berserk and decisive firing, the desperate fighting intent, the dazzling flames blossomed from the explosions and the trembling scene. Inside the desperate abyss, the sunlight pierced through the dense dark clouds like arrows. The honorable Martial Continent's invasion caused the southern region to sink into unprecedented panic. In other places the scene was explosive and shocking, but in the southern region, its influence was not limited to that. The scene was like a torch that lit up the southern region that had long been drenched in oil. The decisiveness to rush to the rescue, the calmness to wait for the right moment, the powerful individual strength, caused everyone's eyes to light up. To be able to realize the value of the wreckage in such a short period of time, it meant that he was extremely sharp towards battles. No one knew. One after another, trading companies started to hang up their maps that were still wet, with the most eye-catching words Shang Continent written on them. It was said that Master Crane was also a newbie and was the same as them, but they could not see it at all. Being on guard was undoubtedly dry and boring. No one spoke, the surroundings were quiet and the shadows were dim and dark. The inexperienced recruits were able to raise their spirits at the start, but very quickly they became drowsy. She wanted to destroy the honorable Martial Continent. Even if their fighting spirit was eroded by time, they were still soldiers, and their understanding of battles far surpassed ordinary people. And because of that, the shock and impact they received was even more intense. Maybe she had never thought that there would be a day where she would become like that. At times Wei Tingting would think about her previous life, the carefree life. But she did not want to return to the past. Ever since she witnessed the sacrifice of her seniors, revenge had become her first goal in life. The hatred did not make her lose her rationality, and even when she looked at the enemy fleet, her gaze remained calm and steady. Hope, they saw something called hope. They saw the courage they had lost, the courage to face blood and fire. Even the Southern Alliance's performance was not much better. Their defensive line had completely collapsed, and other than Xieyuan, who was the only bright spot, the other places were equally terrible. Bai Yu had defeated Qiu Su Hua, causing the southern region people to cheer, but everyone knew that in terms of the overall situation, Bai Yu's victory, other than helping the allied forces to stabilize the situation, did not have any other substantial changes. There were a total of 10 neurotic arrows that were sent over, and Wei Tingting was allocated one. Outside the stronghold, the wreckage of warships floated everywhere. The once powerful war beasts were only left with burnt wreckage, silently narrating the bitterness of the battle. Now, the wreckage that could be seen everywhere became their natural sentries. War was the best teacher. The continuous battles made Wei Tingting and the rest realize that the densely packed wreckage was their best defense. The complicated terrain allowed them to unleash their fighting strength to the greatest degree. On the other side, Moxin was invincible and unstoppable. The only fortunate thing was that he needed to take a big detour to be able to threaten the Shang continent. Although the battle was tough, but they were not cut off from the outside world. Inside the shadows of a large-scale siege ship wreckage, a vague figure could be seen. Wei Tingting's hand subconsciously caressed the black arrow. The exquisite black arrow that looked like a work of art released a unique undulation like a star treasure. Every neurotic arrow was infused with the latest life spirit produced by the Shang continent, and was the Shang continent's newest secret weapon. There were fewer and fewer enemies like in the past. All the weak fellows seemed to have taken drugs and fearlessly attacked them. The battles started to become difficult, and he suddenly felt as though he was stuck in a swamp. The low-intensity battles were not enough to make him feel threatened, but when their numbers reached a certain level, the situation became delicate. If we were to say that the training in the Sea of Energy had sharpened her willpower, and made her stronger and more confident, then the battle had truly made her understand the cruelty of war. She was extremely fortunate that she had such an outstanding commander. She had already grown up. When they looked into the distance, everyone's eyes constricted. It was the southern region, their home, and the raging fire burned in every single southern region citizen's heart. But when the video of the battle was broadcasted to every corner of the streets, he was even ambushed by a few mercenary groups. The situation was too abnormal. Everyone was stunned. Xieyuan was still all right after all. He was an expert in defense, but after the battle there was no longer any talk of being the third best defender. If it were the other two, would they be able to hold on for 6 hours under such a disadvantageous situation? The first to sense the change was Moxin. He suddenly realized that the enemies that he could easily defeat in the past had suddenly become extremely tenacious. They were like tenacious vines, continuously attempting to entangle his footsteps. Chapter 8:14. They realized that there was something obstructing them from communicating with their own law surfaces. Honorable Marshal Stronghold. Zhongli Bai's face did not look good. The adjutant's eyes revealed a trace of excitement. Master, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. How many years has it been since so many Sin citizens have appeared? This is a true merit. It has been so long since the past, who knows if they have forgotten about the people involved. With such a huge merit in our hands, if we find someone to plead for us, we might be able to be transferred away. But when he saw that the people were actually retreating, he immediately relaxed. Du Xinyu and the rest were shocked. They did not know that Dooku had barged into the Sin door before. Dooku, who had the heart to fight to the death, became even more calm and saw even more things. The innumerable crowd was like a dark cloud that suddenly arrived, covering the sky and the sun. The Sin door was built along the mountain with thick walls that dominated the valley. The gigantic city gate was like a sluice that cut off the valley. The city gate was made out of a snow-white metal, and on its surface was a gigantic Honorable Marshal Continent's sun engraving, which released a dazzling white light like the sun. In the distant horizon, densely packed black dots suddenly appeared. Their numbers were so many, as though they were countless of black bees. The so-called auxiliary suppression means that we do not directly attack the target, but use some auxiliary methods to weaken and suppress the target. Nie Qiu spoke frankly with assurance. The white light released by the sun engraving on the city gate is called the Light of the Stronghold. It is unique to the Honorable Marshal Stronghold, and is able to increase the density of radiant attribute energy here. In the first 100 years after they were chased into the Sin domain, how many people died on the road? They were uncountable. At that time the group of Sin citizens were arrogant and untamed, They did not fear death and crazily charged into the sin door. Dooku looked at Null Division with red eyes. Dooku raised his head. Do the two of you have any ideas? The more he thought about it, the more excited he became and could not help but laugh out loud. Dooku was suspicious. Auxiliary suppression? He saw an army of over 5,000 men, all of them moving in an orderly manner. Every soldier had a transparent air shield beneath their feet. 5,000 men stepped on the air shield and flew forward. The sound was like a drum, accompanied by visible air currents that burst out in all directions. The suffocating pressure enveloped the sin door. Ka, the sound of teeth chattering suddenly came out. However, even if he knew that it was because of white light, he also did not know how to resolve it. His law domain was not affected much by the white light, but he knew how sturdy those snow-white walls were. Hearing this, Dooku hurriedly asked, "Is there anything particular about it?" Zhong Libai spoke. And the Honorable Martial Stronghold's suppressive abilities are not just limited to this. The dense Honorable Martial energy allows them to freely combine their suppressive methods. These methods were all mixed in the white light, so it was not easy to detect. However, the attacking side's strength would be greatly weakened. For example, his stamina would be drained faster. We've done some experiments. The light element looks very peaceful, but when its concentration exceeds a certain value, it will become extremely exclusive. The other elemental energies will be suppressed, and from the looks of it, not only will the other elemental energies be affected, but the laws will be affected even more. It is more troublesome, Zhong Libai muttered. It could be said that they had turned out in full force for this battle. Not only did Tang Tian and Dooku's armies move out, there were also a few hastily formed armies that followed along. Tang Tian could not be bothered with them and Dooku did not object. From the start, Dooku had never thought about the strength of this motley crew, but ultimately the Sin domain was his home, and he hoped that this battle would be able to bring about more changes to the Sin domain that was slowly losing its fighting spirit, and the best way was to let more people witness the battle. Currently, the Honorable Martial Stronghold that had been built for over 200 years had become stronger and stronger as time passed. The Sin door was like a lock around the Sin domain's neck and it was getting tighter and tighter. How many people are there? The two armies that were originally stationed there were now one army. And the original main army had become an ordinary army. The only thing that made them feel uneasy was that the number of Sin citizens were too many. When Kong and the rest awoke from their stupor and immediately sounded the alarm, causing the panicking soldiers to ascend the walls. Niechio spoke out, "It's not that there is no way, but whether it will be effective or not, we need to try it to know. I heard that Mr. Du had barged into the Sin door before. I wonder if you can tell us about the situation." This effect is continuous. The longer time passes, the denser the honorable martial energy will become. This place is located in the middle of the valleys, and the terrain is narrow, which is beneficial for the accumulation of energy. That is the most powerful aspect of the Honorable Martial Stronghold. Other strongholds will become weaker and weaker as time passes, but the Honorable Martial Stronghold is the complete opposite. We have done some deductions. If the Honorable Martial Stronghold is built for more than 500 years, its walls will continue to be strengthened by the Honorable Martial energy, and it will crystallize. A crystallized Honorable Martial Stronghold is unbreakable. The light of the stronghold was not considered tyrannical, but in the area it enveloped, the laws would be submerged by the dense Honorable Martial energy. It was a sea of Honorable Martial energy. Wu Xian's body froze and then his face became ecstatic. That's right. As long as we kill all of these Sin citizens, we will have accomplished a great merit. I am sick of staying in this damned place. As long as I achieve a great merit, I will have an excuse to move around. Wu Xian was even sorting out his connections, although he had sat on the bench for so many years, but he was still able to find some connections. In the past he did not have an excuse and it was useless for him to find people, but now the heavens had opened their eyes and gave him such a great merit. He was the #1 man in Sin domain and his understanding of laws was extremely deep and no one in Sin domain could match him. He immediately understood why he would fail every time he tried to break through. The bloody suppression caused the pathway to be filled with bones, and the name of the death path home gradually rose. From then on, the number of Sin citizens that tried to break through the Sin door became lesser and lesser. In the years that when Kong and the rest had been stationed here, they would only see a few of them every few years. When Kong, who was previously speaking eloquently, was trembling like a sieve, his face as white as paper, his eyes were filled with endless fear. "Master, this is an opportunity." Wu Xian's adjutant suddenly spoke up. The intoxicated Wu Xian climbed up the city walls, and upon seeing the black mass of soldiers below, he immediately sobered up. The fine vibrations sounded like a swarm of bees flapping their wings. Du Xin Yu and the rest also revealed looks of shock, especially the list of powerhouse's martial artists. They all tried to activate the power of laws, and following that, everyone's faces changed. The closer they got to Yu City, the greater the effect. Thinking about the impregnable stronghold beneath them, all of their fear was swept away. The Sin Door had a history of over 200 years, although it was 200 years away from its crystallization, but it was still extremely powerful. For example, the light of the stronghold had a radius of over 60 kilometers. When it was first constructed, the light of the stronghold's radius was only a mere 5 kilometers. When Kong and the rest experienced the initial panic but quickly calmed down. At that time, for the sake of guarding the Sin domain, the stronghold was constructed to an extremely high standard. At that time, the reason why they acted as though they were facing a great enemy was because there were many people who barged into the Sin Door, and the stronghold that they entered was relatively weak. Duke's guess was confirmed, but he was not happy at all. He had a deep understanding of laws, but was extremely unfamiliar with energy. The Sin Door emitted an aura that he did not like, and in the past he thought that it was because too many people had died here. He did not think that the seemingly gentle white light was actually the main culprit. Finding the source of the sound did not make LV Kai and the others happy. On the contrary, a bone-piercing chill shot up from the soles of their feet and quickly spread through their bodies. They were like a group of frozen statues, motionless. Tang Tian was a complete amateur in terms of commanding battles. If Bing was here, he would definitely have completed the preparations earlier. And the initial level light of the stronghold had already risen to the middle level, and its might had a qualitative leap. Nyechio, who was by the side, spoke out. "Honorable Martial Alliance, oh, that is what you call the Honorable Martial Continent. They have a set of standards for the construction of strongholds. It is extremely strict and has very few weaknesses, and its most outstanding point is that it possesses a large number of auxiliary suppressions." Tang Tian sized up the Sin Door. The initial buzzing sound was like a tide approaching, becoming clearer and clearer. It was formed from the air currents that they had stirred up. When Su Yi and the rest who were beside Tang Tian heard their words, their faces changed. Nyechio and Zhong Li Bai's strength had long been acknowledged by everyone, but Su Yi and the rest were used to the two of them competing, and it was the first time they had seen the two of them having the same opinion. At that time there was not one army stationed at the Sin Door but two armies. Although Wu Xian was ostracized, but he still had his standards. He knew that as long as laws were affected, the Sin Door was a group of weak chickens, and other than being killed by them there was no other way. Amidst the buzzing sound, it was accompanied by the sound of war drums. They had never seen such a scene before and had never even imagined such a scene before. The path to the Sin Door was called Death's Return, and it was filled with bones and corpses. The pale white bones that had been eroded by the wind had already turned from a dense white to a dim gray. The Death's Return was a gray path. He did not know that he was being watched. When had they ever seen such a spectacular scene before? The Honorable Martial Alliance was the existence that the 12 ecliptic palaces feared the most, and was the target that the 12 ecliptic palaces researched the most. Compared to the other constellations that researched the martial techniques of the Honorable Martial Alliance, the Leo constellation that produced many military generals was more inclined to research the military aspects of the Honorable Martial Alliance, and naturally included the Honorable Martial Stronghold. "No problem," Dooku said straightforwardly. Dong dong dong. Very few people knew that Dooku had barged through the Sin Door before, and no one knew better than him how difficult it was to do so. Even with Tang Tian's help, he still had the heart to fight to the death. Victory meant life, defeat meant death. What he paid the most attention to was the Null Division. The standard of tactics displayed by the Null Division far surpassed the other armies, and Dooku could not help but fantasize that one day his own army would be able to reach such a level. Everything was because of the stronghold that was constantly becoming stronger. Dooku muttered, "So that's how it is." Nyechio's tone was calm, but it made everyone around take in a cold breath. But Wu Xian did not understand. Countless of them. Chapter 8:15. The soldiers of the 7th row made their move. One after another spatial law threads intersected in the air, forming a large net that enveloped the ice spear. The hailstorm slowly slid forward and plunged into the lightning ring tunnel. Jizai and Fu Zhengji did not think much about it. They thought that Tang Tian only wanted to see the Sin door. Their eyes met. Wu Xian's face was filled with suspicion. With the Sin door as the center, within a 60 kilometers radius, the dense radiant energy surged majestically, like a white sea of light, slowly revolving. All the laws in the 60 kilometers radius were submerged by the radiant energy. The radiant energy continued to evaporate and disappear, but the Sin domain's repulsion towards energy did not disappear, just that the Sin door produced even more radiant energy, causing the white sea of light to slowly expand. The spinning speed of the ice storm became even more intense, and in its center, a black dot the size of a needle appeared. Enveloped by the green flames, the sound of the ice spear spinning could no longer be heard. The ice spear continued to become thinner, and the green flames became more and more transparent. The spear body became even thinner. Its original thickness of a bowl was now as thick as a wrist. Seeing the blood net ice spear slowly advancing, a look of excitement flashed past Jizai's eyes. In a sense, laws were like commanders while energy was like soldiers. Within the capabilities of a commander, the more soldiers there were, the stronger their fighting capabilities. And when the number of soldiers far exceeded the capabilities of the commander, then the commander's usefulness would be greatly reduced. The slowly advancing ice storm spear pierced into the flames. The fine ice crystals quickly melted, but the rings of lightning prevented them from escaping. The ice storm spear became even thinner. No, it should be called the ice water spear. Tactic number 9 was a classic example. It was the God Armor Army's most powerful tactic, and at the same time, it was the most complicated tactic. The crystal clear ice arrow had circles of ice patterns on its body, and the faintly discernible dark red blood net was extremely terrifying. Between the blood net, the light grains were like stars. The faint flame patterns seemed to flow slowly, like the dazzling nebula in the night sky. Niechio and the rest who were discussing were startled. They all stopped at the same time and raised their heads. Jizai heaved a sigh of relief. Perfect. Even though the entire process looked gentle and weak, but only they knew of the danger involved. The slightest mistake would result in unimaginable consequences. Tactic number 9 had extremely high requirements for cooperation, and it was also the tactic that they had failed the most. Every time they practiced, they had to be 120% focused. The originally ghastly green flames quickly faded and became crystal clear. A bold idea suddenly popped into Tang Tian's mind. Kill this guy. Unlike the others, Duke's gaze was fixed on Tang Tian. After witnessing the training of the God Armor Army, he was filled with curiosity towards the army that Tang Tian had personally created. How exciting! The scene in front of him was shocking, but it did not cause any ripples in Tang Tian's heart. Energy was one type of soldier and the power of flesh and blood was another. The third row of lightning flashed and colorful lightning rings appeared in front of the hailstorm. These lightning rings were of different colors. There were azure, blazing silver, scarlet, and so on. They were extremely beautiful. The lightning rings were larger than the hailstorm. They appeared neatly in front of the hailstorm, forming a colorful tunnel of lightning rings. Begin. Let's give it a try. At this time, the ice spear was as thin as an arrow. His thoughts were extremely clear. That thought flashed past everyone's mind, while Niechio and the rest opened their eyes wide. In Heaven's Road, honorable martial strongholds that were over 200 years old were rare, and they were curious to what extent the Sin door's defenses were at. Even the extremely daring Zhong Libai would never think of such a bizarre idea. The honorable martial stronghold that was over 200 years old was definitely the thickest turtle shell. It was absolutely impossible to kill the enemy commander under such tight protection. Tang Tian did not have any distracting thoughts in his mind. Tactic number 9 was extremely powerful, but its difficulty was extremely high as well. Tang Tian's fighting style when commanding the God Armor Army and his own fighting style were two extremes. When he fought alone it was simple and direct, but when commanding the God Armor Army his tactics were extremely complicated. The third row of soldiers made their move, causing intense flames to cover the tunnel. 25 lightning rings caused the hailstorm's diameter to shrink, and its length to lengthen once again, becoming an ice storm spear. Niechio, Zhong Libai and the rest were discussing on how to deal with the honorable martial stronghold, but Tang Tian noticed Wu Xian who was on the walls. Tang Tian started to think seriously. The Sin Door's light of the stronghold covered an area of 60 kilometers, and they had stopped 60 kilometers away from the Sin Door. In the eyes of ordinary people, the Sin Door that was 60 kilometers away was just a small black dot. Tang Tian's eyesight was extremely powerful, and 60 kilometers did not affect him much. But to kill a target 60 kilometers away, and under the protection of the honorable martial stronghold, the difficulty was obvious. It was an extremely beautiful ice spear. It was only as thick as a bowl, sparkling and translucent, with the rapid flow of wind inside it, causing translucent ripples to form densely on the spear body. It was impossible to rely on one person's strength, and the only hope was the God Armor Army. 81 sword auras and blade auras covered the entire blood net. Tactic No. 9 Get ready. It was the God Armor Army's first real battle. That guy looks like a big figure. Just as everyone was discussing, Tang Tian had already pulled the God Armor Army and quietly soared into the sky. But the dense energy was not a good thing for Laws. The difficulty of gaining enlightenment on Laws in the sacred Saint Galaxy was far higher than in Heaven's Road. And in a place like the Sin Domain, gaining enlightenment on Laws was the most direct and effective method. But without energy, the might of Laws was greatly reduced. At the end of the flame tunnel was a cold blue flame. The ice arrows suddenly disappeared. The second row of cold air pervaded out. The fine and sharp ice crystals continuously entered the wind pillar, causing the diameter of the wind pillar to quickly shrink, but the speed of its rotation suddenly increased. The short and thick wind pillar seemed to be pulled by an invisible hand to a length of 2 m, and the originally 2 m diameter also shrunk to 1 m. The ice spear spun and pierced into the blood net, causing the soft blood net to suddenly spin and wrap around the spear body. Every time it passed through a lightning ring, the lightning ring would suddenly tighten, tightly wrapping around the ice storm. What was surprising was that the dazzling lightning rings would dim down the moment they wrapped around the ice storm. The spatial law threads tightly wrapped around the ice spear, causing the transparent green flames to extinguish, transforming into flame markings that adhered onto the spear body, causing the spatial law threads to disappear. Only the current them had the possibility of winning. Ever since Tactic No. 9 was created, it had never been used in a real battle. Dooku and the rest raised their heads to take a look before retracting their gaze. They thought that Tang Tian was definitely trying to probe the situation. And Wu Xian and the rest from the Sin Door did not care. In the dense mass of soldiers, a small group of 200 men was like a small fly, unremarkable. The Sin Domain that did not understand armies would never be able to break through. Tang Tian's gaze landed on Wu Xian, who was on the Sin Door. As though he had sensed something, he raised his head and looked over. Tang Tian's cold voice caused Ji Zai's eyes to constrict. Fu Jingji, who was in the 6th row, was already prepared. A strange look flashed past his eyes. The chief green swords released a green mist. Upon contact with the spear body, it transformed into a green flame that adhered onto the spear body. At the same time, the other soldiers all took action. The multicolored poison entered the green flames like raindrops. Killing intent immediately pervaded out. The ice water spear that had been pulled slowly swept past the cold flames, and quickly congealed into an ice spear. Suddenly, Tang Tian understood why the Sin Domain people were unable to succeed in front of the stronghold. The Sin Door relied on energy while Dooku and the rest relied on the power of the physique. They were both like soldiers, but the number of soldiers on both sides were not on the same level. Even if it was Dooku, a powerful martial artist who had gained enlightenment on law domains, his strength was not even worth mentioning in front of the honorable martial stronghold's 200 years of accumulated honorable martial energy. Tang Tian did not think too much about it. Upon thinking of the brazen idea, he immediately became restless. Why not? Even if I fail, I have nothing to lose. After activating the awakened God armor state, the world in front of Tang Tian immediately became different. The undulation of wind laws rippled out from the last row. The 22 tornadoes merged into one, and were compressed into a wind pillar that did not exceed 2 m in diameter. The dark red blood net immediately entered the ice spear. The ice blue spear body was covered with dense blood red webs. And in the middle of the blood red webs, there were 81 tiny light dots. All of them were sword auras and blade auras. One after another, blade auras and sword auras that contained laws flew towards the blood net. What was surprising was that upon touching the blood net, The blade auras and sword auras that were formed from the power of laws would stick onto the blood net. It slowly flew to Tang Tian. The god armor army that had completed their positions formed a sharp triangle in the air, and Tang Tian was at the tip of the triangle. In the center of the triangle, a 2 m wide tunnel appeared, and Tang Tian was at the entrance of the tunnel. Tang Tian's eyes flashed with a light aura and he suddenly flicked his finger. Ji Zhe, who was in the 4th row, waved his bewitching blade, and a blood net appeared in the tunnel. At the same time, 2 rows of soldiers released their blades and swords. The shock in his mind flashed past, and his body that had been trained countless of times immediately reacted instinctively. It was not only him, everyone else was extremely focused, all of the distracting thoughts in their minds disappeared, and everyone was waiting for the order to fight. Their gazes were focused, their bodies tensed up as though they were wild beasts waiting to attack. Probing attack? The relationship between laws and energy was extremely subtle. In theory, laws were the essence of power, while energy was a form of expression of power. In Heaven's Road, martial artists who had gained enlightenment on laws were able to unleash the power of their martial techniques and spirit techniques to their limits. After gaining enlightenment on laws, they would be viewed as having a profound understanding of a certain attribute of power. Out of all the tactics, the 9th tactic was the strongest single-ranged attack tactic. Master is. The wind pillar rotated at a high speed, but did not make any sound. It slowly slid along the tunnel. Chapter 8:16. The honorable martial stronghold was in an uproar. There was nothing more terrifying than their commanding officer being killed in front of them. On the walls of the stronghold, it was a mess. The soldiers were like headless flies. Their faces were pale white, their eyes filled with fear, their mouths releasing screams that they themselves did not know. He was almost roaring as he spat out the word, "Damn it," from his mouth. Bang! Wu Xian's head exploded like a watermelon. In the blink of the eye, there were no longer any figures standing on the walls of the stronghold. They then realized how laughable their own understanding was. But the two of them quickly became serious. The following battle was going to be a tough one. Suddenly, an extremely dangerous aura surged from the bottom of his heart. "Akai, are we going to die?" The extremely dense white light surged over. The surface of the ice arrows were melting and vaporizing at an astonishing speed. Then the enemy is definitely on the verge of collapse. Zhong Libai's eyes were as sharp as blades. His tone was resolute and decisive. With the death of their commanding general, they are at a loss. With the punishment behind them, they cannot see any hope. They are at a loss and in despair. This is their lowest point. As long as they receive an attack, they will be like snow on a tall mountain. As long as there is a sound, they will crumble. So, we cannot give them the chance to breathe. We must immediately attack them until they crumble. Although Wu Xian had not been in charge for the past few years, but the army was personally brought up by him, and his prestige and reputation was unparalleled among the soldiers. Although in the past few years his actions were not worthy of praise, but he was still the only pillar of support for everyone. What achievements, what heroes, what future were all thrown to the back of their minds. Everyone were extremely excited, everyone listened attentively, everyone knew that in terms of understanding of the honorable martial stronghold, no one knew more than the two of them. In Xin domain, the strong were respected, and after acknowledging Tang Tian's strength, the resistance in their hearts was greatly reduced. Compared to Du Ku and the rest who had lost their composure, Du Xianyu's army had not regained their senses from the silence. All of the list of powerhouses martial artists who had their eyes on the top of their heads were like statues. Although they had not completely accepted it, but at least they did not have any extreme reactions. Du Xianyu learned from Zhong Libai and Ye Qiu and bowed. Although her personal strength was not considered strong, but her strategic foresight was outstanding. Although she had long made plans to join Tang Tian with her brother, she had never revealed it. She only used Tang Tian's great victory to set the tone in this way. When it came into contact with the wall, it was only the size of a soybean, but it still left behind a deep hole the size of a soybean and cracks that looked like a spider web. At a distance of 200 meters, even the extremely dense light of the stronghold could not melt it at a distance of 200 meters. But it was too fast. The vast and majestic light of the stronghold was like a sleeping giant beast that was suddenly awakened. They were surging with rage, crazily surging towards the red dot that had appeared in the hinterland. The light of the stronghold that spanned 60 kilometers had become increasingly blazing, The ethereal white light had solidified to the point of being tangible. The sea of white light that was like a raging tide lost its target and quietened down. The one who died just now should be the enemy's commander. Zhong Libai's expression was extremely excited as he spoke quickly. Niechio had carefully measured it earlier. The Sindor's light of the stronghold has been weakened by 15%. Only when the commander of the stronghold dies will such a situation occur. This is also a unique characteristic of the honorable martial stronghold. The stronghold and the commander have a close relationship. Although ordinary soldiers can also use the light of the stronghold to a certain degree, but to use a large area of effect and might without exception requires the commander to lead. Are we going to join Master's camp? Compared to the despair of the Sindor, Tang Tian's side was brimming with morale. Dooku came here with the mentality of win or die trying, but now he saw a crack in the door of victory. If it was said that previously Tang Tian and the rest did not place him in their eyes, then after the battle, they had witnessed the terrifying strength of the God Armor army, and finally realized that the Tang Tian that they had underestimated had a powerful strength. 60 kilometers away from the stronghold, the tens of thousands of people quietened down. The entire battlefield had sunk into silence as though time had stopped. Wu Xian sighed in his heart. He was startled for a moment. Currently he was drunk every day and had nothing to do thinking about the past when he was filled with ambition and high spirits. He could not help but feel bitter in his mouth. When Kang's lips did not have any color of blood, he was trembling and unable to speak. His entire body was trembling. Not far from him, Lu Kai's body was completely curled up behind the city wall. Both of his hands were hugging onto his knees. His entire body was trembling like a sieve, his mouth muttering repeatedly. The reason why Wu Xian raised his head was because he had sensed the undulations in the distance. When he saw the 200-odd men in the small group preparing to attack in the air, he was shocked. Zhong Libai hugged his head with his hands. His face was filled with disbelief. He spoke out hysterically, "Impossible. This is impossible. Damn it. Damn it. Master, please wait and see." The honorable martial stronghold that was over 200 years old had a light of the stronghold that covered an entire 60 kilometers. The light of the stronghold that had a radius of 60 kilometers was not only used to weaken the enemy, it could transform between reality and illusion. As long as there was a need, it could instantly transform into a defensive light. To attack the honorable martial stronghold, they had to break through the 60 kilometers thick tortoise shell. It's over. It's over. The long period of muddle-headedness had caused his fighting instincts to deteriorate. When he sensed the danger, he did not dodge at the first moment but was surprised. Everyone's eyes turned to look at Tang Tian. Only Zhong Libai and Niechio revealed looks of contemplation. The reason why Dooku was able to attack the Sindor the last time was because they were bored, and intentionally lured him to the Sindor for fun. If not, with Dooku's strength he would definitely not be able to break through the light of the stronghold. Wu Xian's death had a decisive effect on the entire battlefield. Dooku, who was extremely excited, shot towards Tang Tian, who had just landed, and spoke incoherently. "How did you guys do it? How did you guys do it?" The honorable martial stronghold that was filled with discussions quietened down. Tang Tian replied, "It's the same for the honorable martial continent." After the arrow silhouettes, an afterimage that resembled a comet broom appeared. Wu Xian, who was filled with thoughts of obtaining merits and being transferred away, never thought that he would be ambushed. Everyone's eyes landed on Tang Tian's face, mixed with worship, reverence, and fear. The excessively young man had finally convinced all of the Sin domain elites who had their eyes on the top of their heads. Borrowing the power of spatial laws, the ice arrow that had pierced into the sea of white light had become thinner by half. The spatial laws on the arrow body had completely disappeared, but it did not slow down at all. Like a cold lightning, it flashed past. Wu Xian's headless corpse was still standing in its original position. Despair pervaded the entire Sindor. When Kang's voice was trembling, he did not understand why the situation would suddenly become like that. Truly beautiful. Dooku and the rest were convinced. They acknowledged the model of the army, but they firmly believed that as long as they grasped the crux of the army, whatever null division, they would definitely be trampled beneath their feet. Dooku and Du Xinyu looked at each other. The two of them heaved a sigh of relief. They did not wish for the Sin domain army that they had painstakingly built up to be torn apart because of this reason. Tang Tian did not hesitate and replied, "All right. With the protection of the light of the stronghold that spanned over 60 kilometers, Wu Xian was naturally not afraid of any sneak attacks. He had never heard of any attack that could break through the light of the stronghold that spanned over 60 kilometers. He regained his senses from his daze but was startled. A fiery red dot appeared out of thin air less than 200 meters away from him. Yes, it's over, that was the word in everyone's mind. Niechio had also lost his usual calmness. He did not even notice that his hands were trembling uncontrollably in his sleeves. His face was as though he had lost his soul. That's not reasonable, that's not reasonable. The sea of white light roared angrily. Many of them immediately laid on the ground and hid their bodies behind cover. Niechio, Zhong Li Bai, Du Ku and the rest, without exception, all had frozen expressions. Truly too young, Wu Xian could not help but sigh. Time was merciless and time was wasting away. That young and immature face reminded him of his youth. Danger? How can it be dangerous? I am inside the stronghold. Could there be any attack that can break through the light of the stronghold? But the unimaginable attack was like a bucket of ice water, drenching them from head to toe. What a joke, how is that possible? Dooku stood up without hesitation. Let us do it. Zhong Li Bai continued. So, the 15% weakening is only on the surface, it is far from that. The enemy's morale is extremely low. I do not know what the situation is like in the Honorable Martial Continent, but the Honorable Martial Alliance's rule is, if the general dies and the soldiers are not injured, that means that the soldiers did not protect well, and all the soldiers will be punished, and the punishment is extremely severe. Death was so sudden and so close. Before the self-mocking smile on his face could fade away, his pupils suddenly constricted. Much less 200 people, even if they had 10 times more people, they would not be able to pose any threat to the Honorable Martial Stronghold. The ice arrows that had not lost their momentum effortlessly pierced through the bodies of 3 soldiers, and pierced into the walls of the stronghold. Lu Kai trembled as he muttered, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. His face was slightly pale. The attack just now was extremely powerful, but it had consumed a lot of his energy. The list of powerhouses martial artists behind her all had their own thoughts. Everyone looked at each other but no one objected. There was no blazing light aura, only a comet tail that seemed to appear out of thin air. It had never appeared in the past and would never appear in the future. The entire Honorable Martial Continent was extremely confident. The only thing that made Wu Xian interested was the leader. The deathly silence lasted for a full 30 seconds. The rumbling sound was like a raging wave that was swept up into the sky but fiercely smashed down, engulfing the entire battlefield. In truth, all of the list of powerhouses martial artists looked down on the Null Division. Every single list of powerhouses martial artists not only required extraordinary talent, they also required countless of battles to temper themselves. They had stepped step by step into the ranks of Sin Domain's strongest martial artists, so how could they look up to anyone else? His gaze was blank, his expression absent-minded. Du X and you also stood up. My unit requests to fight. Chapter 8:17. Amidst the loud sound, the light of the stronghold dissipated. The sun engraving on the door of the Sin door broke into pieces. The thick tortoise shell was finally broken. This made him even more determined to join Tang Tian's camp. Sacred Saint Galaxy, I'm coming. Niechio shook his head. There is no way to replicate this unless you can find another Dooku. In the past, the Honorable Martial Continent had garrisons here, but as the Honorable Martial Continent grew stronger, no one was able to threaten them, and the desolate continent's garrisons were removed. Dooku stood at the front of the formation and was the sharpest spear tip of the formation. All of the power of laws converged on his body, releasing a boundless light aura, making him look like a god of war. The powerful control of the law domain was displayed to its fullest. With a wave of his hand, an astonishing amount of power of laws were mobilized, transforming into powerful and peerless attacks that smashed onto the white light below. It was easy to imagine that upon falling into the swamp of the army, it would be a huge problem. There were no armies in the western region, but in the central region, which was also the most flourishing and developed region of the Honorable Martial Continent, was heavily guarded. Especially with Jiaya, one of the 5 Honorable Martial Tigers, holding the fort. If it was just Jiaya alone, and it was Jiaya who was famed for his defense, it would lessen the pressure on everyone, but the number of armies that Jiaya could mobilize caused everyone's faces to turn pale. So powerful. Zhou raised his head, his face filled with shock. Dooku stared at everything in front of him. He did not dare believe his own eyes. His wish of so many years had been fulfilled, causing him to feel a strong sense of surrealism as though he was in a dream. After a short moment of silence, even more intense cheers came out, as though the sky of the Sin domain was flipped upside down. The army's tactics revolved around Dooku. Zhou thought about himself. Niechio's Null Division was already in its embryonic form. The Du siblings' armies were currently extremely powerful. Only his own army seemed to be far away. Only by leaving this damned place and returning to the Sacred Saint Galaxy can I establish a connection with the Ursa Major constellation and obtain the blood-boiling steel monsters. The good news was that the Honorable Martial Continent's western region was not connected to any other powerhouses. Thus the number of armies was pitifully small, and their strength was rather weak. The bad news was, if they wanted to return to the Shang continent, it meant that they had to cross the entire Honorable Martial Continent. How would she know that Tang Tian did not even listen to Niechio's words, when he heard that although everyone's situation was not easy, but they were all safe and sound, the boulder in his heart dropped and his thoughts flew away. There was no cautious probing, just a powerful attack right from the start. Tang Tian noticed Du Xin's gaze and grinned at her. Niechio had to admit that Zhou was right. Dooku, who had gained enlightenment on the law domain, had definitely reached an inhuman level, and there were no secrets in his eyes. And Du Xinyu did not hold anything back. She placed all of her power and choice on Dooku. Her foresight and decisiveness was equally shocking. Dooku's existence determined the starting height of the army. But Du Xinyu's growth limit would determine the limit of the army's future. The expression on Duke's face was very strange, as if he wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. Especially when he saw the soldiers who had surrendered, his heart was even more complicated. All of them had long lost their fighting spirit, and upon understanding the daily training of the soldiers, he became even more anxious. With so many of them, it was impossible for them to not attract attention when they passed through the entire Honorable Martial Continent, as it was their territory. Dooku's body trembled, the bewilderment in his eyes swept away. That's right, we have won. We are finally going to rush out of the Sin domain and start anew. All of the lost faith, courage, glory will be regained. The power of laws had been arranged and coordinated by Du Xinyu and gathered at Dooku's side. Only Dooku, who had gained enlightenment on the law domain, was able to withstand such a powerful force. Du Xinyu carefully observed how the Null Division operated, but she did not blindly imitate their tactics, but specially designed a brand new fighting style to counter the Sin domain army. He initially felt disdain towards the Sin domain army. In terms of training in laws, he could never catch up to them, but in terms of commanding an army, he had the qualifications to look down on them. Hearing that Dooku wanted to build an army, he sneered in his heart. Do you think an army is so easy to build? Tang Tian's side erupted in cheers. Which top-notch army can be replicated? Zhou was surprised. As long as they lost Dooku, the army would not have any fighting strength. But he felt that it was a pity, for so many experts on the list of powerhouses had completely abandoned their own style. Dooku, who was clear-minded, when he saw that Tang Tian and the rest had already started to interrogate the Honorable Martial Continent soldiers and obtain information, he immediately felt ashamed. As for the Sin domain, it was just a huge prison and had long been forgotten by the higher-ups of the Honorable Martial Continent. From the start to the end, the Sin door did not retaliate once, and the defense of the light of the stronghold continued to be depleted. What was initially thought to be a difficult battle had turned into a boring performance of sieging a city. You have to admit, this tactic suits them the best. Zhou scoffed at Niechio's words, his eyes revealing a light of excitement. Simple, perfect, powerful. It has reduced the possibility of any mistakes, and the consumption of strength is extremely small. Handing the battle to Dooku, is there a better choice? I can't think of anyone else other than Master who can compare to Dooku in terms of fighting instincts. Dooku is their strongest point, and Du Xianyu has made an unparalleled choice. She has used all of her chips to strengthen her strongest point. Truly a terrifying woman. Niechio suddenly said, the Sin door cannot hold on any longer. The enemies had surrendered. He had never seen such an extreme tactic before. It could be said that the army was completely Dooku's army. Other than providing the power of laws, the soldiers did not have any other use. There was no so-called coordination, no variations, All of the battles were decided by Dooku alone. Is that true? Zhong Libai retracted his thoughts and looked back at the battlefield, his mouth twitching. Seems like the enemy's morale is much lower than we expected. It's actually extremely tyrannical. There were thousands of tactics, but the core concept did not differ in essence. In the end, it was to gather all of the scattered strength. Du Xinyu had boldly designed an extreme tactic. All of the strength was gathered on Dooku, allowing Dooku to initiate the attack. That's true. Niechio nodded his head. The Sin Domain army had Dooku and Du Xinyu, and truly had the qualifications to grow into a top-notch army. The interrogation did not take much effort. All of the surrendered honorable Martial Continent soldiers had long lost their will to resist, and poured out everything they knew. Like a giant swinging a heavy hammer, every strike would cause the ground to tremble. The Sin Door's stronghold light surged intensely and continued to shrink. It's too extreme. Niechio said after a long while. Everyone, I'm here. In the entire Sin Domain, the only one who had gained enlightenment on a law domain was Dooku. The Southern Expedition could be said to have sent out all of their elites, but they were the most elite armies, as a large number of ordinary armies remained in the honorable Martial Continent. Even though it was an easy victory, but Dooku knew that without Tang Tian with just their own strength, it was impossible for them to obtain victory. Dooku, who was in the sky, suddenly pressed down with his palm. The surging power of laws transformed into a dazzling light pillar, and without any fancy moves, it struck the thin layer of white light. All of this greatly diluted the joy of victory, and everyone's faces became gloomy. A change in quantity would lead to a change in quality, and when the numbers reached a certain level they would drown. They needed to cross the entire desolate continent and enter the Whitefields continent, before they could encounter the first city. Du Xinyu, who was in the center of the formation, completely disappeared under Dooku's light aura, and did not attract any attention. Her movements were simple and efficient. Without any sloppiness, she controlled the army in an orderly manner. Du Xinyu glanced at Tang Tian, seeing that his expression was normal, as though he was not intimidated by the number of armies. The desolate continent was not small, and was a middle-sized continent, located at the westernmost part of the honorable Martial Continent, but it was extremely barren and desolate. No one knew if it was because of the Sin Domain's influence, but the energy concentration was much lower than ordinary continents, and there were no valuable minerals, thus there were no humans living there. Dooku's performance was expected, because he was familiar with the style of battle. Du Xinyu's eyes lit up, and also allowed Niechio to see her outstanding talent. To be able to perform so well in her initial army, her future was limitless. The star door inside the stronghold led to the desolate continent. Tang Tian was extremely excited. He was finally returning to the Sacred Saint Galaxy. As long as he returned, he would be able to communicate with Bing. The entire Sin Domain is actually blocked by a group of people who have no fighting spirit. On Tang Tian's face there was no pride of victory. His eyes were still as clear as water. He was much older than Tang Tian, but compared to Tang Tian he was still lacking. Du Xinyu understood her brother's feelings and said softly, "We have won and everything will start anew." Bang! There were over 600 armies of all sizes. Niechio led the Null Division and entered the Sin Door at the first moment. After ensuring their safety, Tang Tian, who was already impatient, brought everyone and rushed in. Du Xinyu knew that the soldiers of the Sin Domain army were definitely not as meticulous as the Null Division, but they had an advantage that the Null Division did not have, and that was Dooku. Du Xinyu was startled. Her expression did not change, but she noticed that Tang Tian's smile had caused the heavy atmosphere to loosen up, and she could not help but admire him. He seems to never know fear. This kind of leader is worthy of everyone's trust. Then just at that moment the heavy stronghold door slowly opened. The two of them were both from the academy, but their ideals were completely different. Niechio preferred to explore the internal laws of war, while Zhong Libai was more practical and was more obsessed with victory. She was the true core of the army. It was under her control that her personality slowly seeped into the army, and influenced the army's fighting style. But the strange army in front of him had completely toppled his understanding, especially Du Xinyu's performance. Although there were some flaws in the details, but she still displayed astonishing talent. Chapter 8:18. But most of them were the young and vigorous youths who thirsted for achievements. Aya calmed down. A figure dressed in a trench coat with a pale face appeared on the stage of the recruitment office. Compared to them, their achievements were much dimmer, but regardless of whether it was him or Aya, they were all convinced by Xiu An's achievements. The entire scene was extremely explosive, and became the hottest news that day, spreading throughout the entire southern region. Aya walked to his side and sat down. Her gaze landed on Wu Matian. He was much thinner than before, but his eyes were extremely black and bright, releasing a threatening light aura. Personally witnessing Wu Matian's transformation, Aya rejoiced in her heart. Luckily she was moved at that time, and pulled the fellow who roasted pig trotters over. Aya raised her head and stared straight at Wu Matian. The veins on her hand that was holding onto her sword hilt were popping out. She squeezed out a sentence. Do you want to wipe out the entire skull unit? I only have one request. Should we change to another recruitment office? Qiu Yong asked with some hesitation. The Southern Alliance's tenacity caused them to suffer, but they were also fearful. The other party was truly more proficient in urban warfare, but they also had casualties, but they did not have any intention of retreating. The other party's casualties were around 1,000, and the result of 3-1 was enough to make Zeke feel ashamed. But the disparity in strength between the two parties became even greater. They had the advantage in numbers, and 3,000 casualties was not enough to break their bones. And the other party only had around 5,000 people, and with 1,000 casualties, it meant that they had 20% casualties. Dai Shan patted Qiu Yong's shoulder and encouraged him loudly. We will definitely be chosen. Ayong, you must have confidence. Go Qing Wendao, who held on to 22 large-scale siege boats, was actually stopped by the Ocean Guardian stronghold. He did not know how to do it. He had never interacted with Xie Yuan before, and his impression of Xie Yuan was that he was an honest and cautious person with a warm temperament, but he never expected him to be so powerful. He felt that Master Crane was powerful to be expected. He was a proud son of the heavens with clear eyes that could see through people. The Stone Forest Sand Continent had become an inconspicuous meat grinder, and when Zeke reacted, their casualties had already exceeded 3,000. What was worse was their morale. The failure of the Ocean Guardian Stronghold's operation, the enemies that appeared and disappeared like ghosts, and the increasing casualties every day caused their morale to drop to an extreme. Wu Matian's vision blurred. After returning to the camp, Wu Tianma sat on the ground and poured the water into his mouth with all his might. His burning throat finally felt much better. The other party was still extremely tenacious, which meant that the other party was a high-standard army, but Zeke firmly believed that it was just that they had not reached the critical point. The two of them were stunned. They looked at the stage. Xiu An's arrival was beyond everyone's expectations. He had indeed taken the initiative to come over. Zeke's estimation was accurate. The skull unit's casualties were indeed around 1,000. When Wu Matian recalled the reports from the front lines, he was still in disbelief. I don't know. Wu Matian muttered, a trace of confusion and pain appearing on his face. However, his gaze became as sharp as a blade and his tone became cold and firm. This is the only method I can think of. Wu Matianma spat out the mud in his mouth and his face that was covered in smoke became skinnier. The stubble that had not been cleaned for many days was now as hard as iron wire. There was no longer any trace of the sloppy and slippery aura that he had in the past. Instead, he was like a veteran that had been through hundreds of battles, sharp and firm. Aya suddenly turned her head and smiled sweetly. If we win, you have to tell me. Aya was on the verge of collapsing, her face pale white after a long while. Can we win like this? Dai Shan said without hesitation. We must definitely go through the selection. Wu Matian, who was in a daze, asked, what request? It is time for us to fight for it. Aya stood up with a calm expression. She raised the big sword in her hand. The wind blew her fiery red hair, like a regiment of raging flames, almost burning Wu Matian's eyes. Even the best academies would not have such a fiery scene. There were at least a few tens of thousands of people in front of them. Qiu Yong had seen the recruitment list, and the recruitment office only accepted 200 people. Upon disembarking, the two of them were shocked by the number of people in front of them. Qiu Yong was unsure. So many people. A 20% casualty rate to an army with weak willpower was enough to cause them to crumble. Wu Matian did not retreat, but his tone was extremely cold. Only like that can we have a chance of winning. Aya was quiet. She suddenly thought about how she had taken over the army from her father. After that, their lives were extremely difficult. They did not have a proper meal, they lacked weapons, they lacked armor, and at times for the sake of a few 100,000 cloud coins, they had to pay with their lives. Please, we must win. He looked at his comrade who was 10 m away, both of them made a hand gesture, and the group of people slowly retreated, disappearing into the shadows. The entire plaza suddenly became quiet, as though it was under a spell of silence. In the stone forest sand continent, an unending chain of gray stone pillars formed a gray forest. War god Xieyuan. Qiu Yong's eyes stared straight ahead. He held his head with his hands, his face filled with shock. Dai Shan, who was by his side, was extremely excited. The fiery scene in front of him caused his blood to boil. Protecting our homeland, achieving achievements, that is what a young man should do. It is time for us to fight to the death. Qiu Yong and Dai Shan rushed over from the faraway southern glass continent. If not for the free flights to the Southern Alliance, they would not have been able to bear the costs for such a long journey. Wu Matian understood Aya's thoughts. Seeing his comrades leaving one by one, he also felt extremely uncomfortable. That's right, what is there to be dissatisfied about, what is there to be unhappy about? They were originally a lowly life form, but were enjoying the treatment and respect that they could only dream of. They no longer had to suffer hunger and were one of the armies with the best treatment. They were viewed as Master's direct subordinates and had regained their dignity. Oh my god. That is Xieyuan. The Skull Unit's battle plan was completely designed by Wu Matian, and was extremely effective. Wu Matian's outstanding talent also gained the respect of the entire Skull Unit. To Aya, Wu Matian definitely had the strength to stand by Master Bing's side, and being sent to the Skull Unit was a grievance. The Skull Unit used to be a mercenary army, and although everyone was unyielding on the surface, but their hearts were lacking in confidence, and they felt that compared to the regular armies they were still inferior. Dai Shan stuttered, a look of disbelief flashed past his eyes. It was not only him, Qiu Yong who was beside him was also dumbstruck. Hearing Wu Matian's judgment, Aya's face became extremely ugly. The newly formed Southern Alliance had become the hope of the entire southern region. Only the Southern Alliance could stop the honorable Martial continent from invading the South. This argument had long become the mainstream of the market. The traditional aristocratic families and merchants of the southern region had all allied together, and continued to send all sorts of resources to the Southern Alliance. On that day, Xieyuan was appointed as the Southern Alliance recruitment ambassador, and was in charge of inspecting the various recruitment stations. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Dexing's Southern Rainbow Army, Mo Sang's Yuan Continent Army are already behind us and can support us anytime. But I do not recommend for them to enter the battlefield now. The enemy's strength has not been depleted, and they are not fatigued yet. If they enter now, they will not be able to turn the situation around. Xieyuan, who felt that his injuries were not serious, quickly left the hospital. The war was far from over, the Swift Army was almost completely destroyed, and he planned to quickly replenish the Swift Army's military strength, and return to the battlefield as soon as possible. The number of people heading towards the Southern Alliance increased by a few times. Xieyuan was extremely satisfied. The soldiers that he selected were all outstanding in terms of strength and quality. But he would never have thought that his unintentional action would immediately attract the attention of an unscrupulous merchant. When the Southern Punitive Army was unstoppable, no matter how many casualties there were, it would not be a fatal blow to their morale. But when Go Ching Wendao personally took action, he was still thwarted, which greatly affected the morale of the soldiers. Inside the command department, Bing waved his hand. Aha, little Xie's body is not fully recovered yet. It is too forceful for him to participate in the battle. He should just display his remaining strength. Wu Matian laughed. His skinny cheeks had a deep groove, giving off a threatening aura, but his tone was extremely warm. Everyone's performance is not bad, there are some casualties but not many. The enemy is even more unaccustomed to such a method of fighting than us. But, Go Ching Wendao has encountered a setback at the Ocean Guardian stronghold, so I am afraid that they will be anxious. The next period of time will be the true test. The enemy's offense will be extremely intense. Go Ching Wendao was the war god of the army, and in everyone's hearts, as long as Master Go Ching Wendao took action, there would be nothing that he could not break. They had never thought that Master Go Ching Wendao would actually fail. No matter what, we will do it. Isn't this the moment that everyone has been waiting for? Isn't this the oath that everyone had made long ago? When the young man by the side heard his words, he could not help but speak out. Give up on that thought. The other recruitment offices are the same, there will definitely be more people than here. He never thought that his appearance would cause the entire battlefield to erupt. After all, the army was inherited from her father, and many of the people in the army were like brothers to Aya. Seeing the familiar companions leave one after another, her heart was bleeding. The battle would become more intense, and that meant that the casualties would be even greater. Aya's hand that was holding onto her sword could not help but turn white. Oh my God, there are too many of them. Almost every single recruitment office in the Southern Alliance was filled with people. One of the 3 great generals under Go Qingwen Dao Zeke's command had been held back by them for a full 15 days. The vast stone forest sand continent had become their best battlefield. The complicated terrain made it a paradise for street battles. The skull unit was like a fish in water while the enemy was having a hard time. Just at that moment the clamor suddenly disappeared. In the current southern region, how could there be anyone who did not recognize Xie Yuan? All of the citizens who came to participate in the battle had seen the soul-stirring 6-hour decisive battle, and facing their idol, all of them were completely stirred up. In truth, their achievements were outstanding, and Bing had been rewarded more than once. Thank Yuan. The current Southern Alliance was extremely prosperous. The various continents of the southern region all had routes to the Southern Alliance, and it was no longer isolated and without help. The entire southern region's resources and people all surged towards the Southern Alliance from every corner of the southern region. She knew the standard of the skull unit. If not for Wu Tianma, they would definitely be defeated. The respect in her tone came from the bottom of her heart. How's the situation? Chapter 8:19. Everyone understood what was going on and their faces changed. She looked around, all of the familiar faces were filled with fatigue, no one was unharmed. Everyone were talking at once, all of them laughing and talking without restraint, their faces were filled with sorrow. The meeting room was filled with smoke and the floor was filled with cigarette butts. Bang! I am still too inexperienced, Bing mocked himself bitterly. This bit of pressure had tormented me to such a state. His heart was blocked by something and the familiar pain caused his entire body to tremble. There was nothing more heart-wrenching than seeing his comrades leaving one by one. But as the commander-in-chief he needed to be absolutely rational. So he agreed to Wu Tian's plan, which was the best plan so far. Aya could no longer remember how many battles they had fought for 6 days and 6 nights. They did not stop for even a moment, and the enemies were like a tide. Her great sword was filled with cracks, her beautiful face was covered in smoke. Only her fiery red hair was dazzling like a raging inferno. The god gold arrow's fine lines suddenly lit up with a dazzling light aura, and along the way the energy was frantically absorbed by it. The arrow's body lit up with a misty light aura. The light aura continued to expand, like a flowing nebula, changing continuously in the air. The following battle would be the true test. They needed to welcome Go Qingwen Dao's crazy counterattack. A counterattack that disregarded all losses. Finally obtaining the precious time to rest, Aya leaned on her sword and gasped for breath. How many men do we have left? His body froze. Aya's ears twitched. She pulled out her great sword from the ground, her expression cold. Prepare for battle. Bing was dumbstruck. The cigarette in his mouth dropped to the ground, causing sparks to fly. In an instant, everyone's vision was filled with a vast expanse of whiteness. The terrifying explosion caused everyone's ears to buzz, and they could not hear anything else. Worth it. Countless sparks flew everywhere, and the bow of a warship suddenly extended out from the flames. It was actually the second warship. It actually did not dodge at all and forcefully charged through the flames. But the large-scale warship's defense was extremely strong, and when the arrow light landed on the protective barrier, it only caused some ripples. The large-scale warship was unstoppable, and with an astonishing speed, it flew towards the wreckage. As expected of Go Qingwen Dao. Roar. Crane stopped his soldiers from fighting with their lives on the line. He stared at the gigantic ships that were flying like moths to a flame. Huge balls of exploding sparks formed a straight line. They burned fiercely and then slowly extinguished. I have nothing to say, Lord Little Tang. The Wei clan disciples drew their bows and arrows. In an instant, arrows rained down on the first warship. He thought of his regiment commander, Xen Screw, and those familiar faces that had disappeared in the passage of time. The only divine gold arrow in her hand was knocked on the bowstring. Bang! The divine gold arrow instantly disappeared. Wreckage belt outside the Ocean Guardian stronghold. Someone in the crowd jeered, "That's enough, third brother. That rotten life of yours isn't worth anything." The triangular-eyed man opened his mouth but nothing came out. After a moment he said, "It's all here." Crane immediately sensed an unusual aura, and an intense uneasiness surfaced in his heart. Boom. He had no choice but to cut off all means of retreat. There were only a few hundred people left. The second warship exploded less than 3,000 feet away from the wreckage. Speaking of which, it was strange, Crazy Tang was a freak. No matter how he looked at him, he was always a hindrance and a troublemaker. I never thought that after not seeing him for a period of time I would miss him. With the first experience, everyone's reaction became much better. One after another, gigantic warships formed a line and rushed towards the wreckage belt at full speed. Wei Ting and the rest revealed looks of suspicion. What was the use of such a move? All of the gigantic warships were clumsy, and were unable to pass through the wreckage belt, so they had to use small-scale warships. A roar that resembled a tiger's roar sounded out in the battlefield. Another divine gold arrow tore through the air. Suddenly, an indescribable undulation surfaced in his mind. "That's enough. I actually place my hopes of victory on such a person. When did I fall to such a state? I must be hallucinating." A look of sorrow surfaced in Aya's eyes. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I'm sorry, everyone." When it struck the first warship's protective barrier, the protective barrier trembled intensely, like a soap bubble that could burst at any moment. Everyone had the same thought after fighting for the past few days. Everyone knew that if not for the wreckage belt, they would definitely not be able to hold on until now. And Go Qing Wendao also knew that, so he did not hesitate to waste a few large-scale warships to create a wide path through the wreckage belt. How do I replenish spirit generals? In the Stone Forest Sand Continent, the enemies seemed to have gone crazy, and continued to advance wave after wave. Wei Ting was the first to react and shouted, "Use the divine gold arrows." Everyone listened quietly, their mouths revealing knowing smiles. They could not help but think about their past lives. Bing laughed at himself. He took a deep breath. "I definitely have too much pressure recently and need to replenish myself. I must definitely stop him." Triangle Eyes raised his eyebrows and said, "So why are we willing? We are selling our lives, and that is our lives. Now that we are selling our lives for such a price, everyone, do you think it's worth it?" The distance between every warship was obviously calculated meticulously, allowing everyone to experience Go Qing Wendao's meticulous mind. But the enemy was equally dauntless. The warships at the back once again pierced through the flames from the explosion of the warship in front. Bing's prediction was not wrong. The continuous battle reports caused everyone's heart to jump. "Seems like I have been too nervous recently to the point of hearing things." He remained silent, his poker face shrouded in the smoke and could not be seen clearly. Go Qing Wendao planned to use these warships to blast a path through the wreckage belt. A light aura that was even brighter than the sun suddenly lit up. The familiar mumbling was heard. "Big sister, don't say that." Triangle Eyes chuckled with a hint of self-mockery. "We buy Lu Continent's mercenaries. Which one of us isn't out to sell our lives? What kind of life did everyone lead in the past? Old He, do you still remember the broken blade that you used at that time? After using it for 6 years, it can already be used as a saw. At that time we heard that a tyrant wanted to buy an army. Alright, although we are a mercenary army, we can still be considered an army. Everyone thought hugging onto a golden thigh is better than what we are now. Only like that could they display their superiority in military strength." The map in front of Bing was filled with all sorts of symbols and arrows. His poker face did not move and was deep in thought. The blazing light aura dimmed down and everyone's vision gradually recovered. All of the large-scale warships were filled with explosive energy, and upon being struck, they would explode violently. Ah! Bang! The war was starting to enter its climax. "What? I feel that third brother's words are right." Everyone chuckled. The large-scale warships were huge and had difficulty turning, but their speed was not slow at all. Bing's mind suddenly popped out with that thought. If only Crazy Tang is here. The sharp warning sound resonated throughout the entire formation. Both parties were holding on to their breath, and whoever let it go first would lose. "Hey Uncle Bing, long time no see." The large-scale warship's protective barrier had completely crumbled. To the Southern Alliance they had no other choice. The defense line was crisscrossed and they held the advantage of defending. Someone suggested to retreat and lure the enemy deeper in but was rejected by Bing. Ai's body froze. Suddenly he thought of something and revealed a look of shock. He ordered, "Sagittarius constellation, attack the first warship." The warship completely disintegrated, and an incomparably large regiment of flames appeared less than 500 m away from everyone. Even though everyone were attacking frantically, the fourth warship plunged into the wreckage. To Go Qing Wendao, it was the most suitable battle style for him, and was also the best way to display his fighting strength. The current Go Qing Wendao was like a lightly injured wolf. Not only would he not retreat, but he would become even more berserk. The continuous setbacks had caused Go Qing Wendao to lose too much time, and it also caused Go Qing Wendao to throw away all of his burdens. The earth-shattering explosion, the incomparable shock wave immediately swept out a large empty space in the wreckage. The training is so tiring that I want to run. On top of a piece of wreckage, Crane stood with his sword. His figure was tall and slender, his eyes were as clear as water. He looked at the army opposite him, then turned and organized everyone to retreat. Morale. The continuous bloody battles not only stabilized the defensive line, but also stabilized the morale of the Southern Alliance. The armies of the Southern Alliance were no longer as easily defeated as before. They still had the determination to win, but the despair that they had previously felt had disappeared. If they were to retreat now, the morale that they had stabilized with great difficulty would quickly crumble. Xie Yuan becoming the recruitment ambassador was just a small interlude. The intensity of the battle did not decrease at all. If we were to say that in the Battle of the Ocean Guardian Stronghold, Go Qing Wendao still had an intense self-confidence and a trace of contempt, then the current lunatic was definitely clear of his own predicament. The third god gold arrow brought along a dazzling and gorgeous light mist, and pierced into the warship that had lost its protection. There is no other boss like Master. He has a lot of money and his equipment is well taken care of. If not for the bitter training that makes people want to run, this old man would have thought that he had met a fat sheep. But after a long time this old man's heart started to feel weak. Why, the treatment is too good. Everyone knows our own standards. This old man did not have the face to tell Master that we are not worthy of such treatment. After that, this old man's heart became afraid. We are selling our lives with such a good treatment. I am afraid that we will not be able to keep our lives. But now I have realized that Master is the true profiteer, to obediently let us sell our lives. How we are doing it willingly. Losing the wreckage was a foregone conclusion, and the following battles would not be easy. No reaction. Can't you hear me? Is there a problem? The old antiques of the Southern Cross Army are truly unreliable. We're finished. Where do we go to repair this? The terrifying explosive shock wave swept out in all directions like a raging wave. The large-scale wreckage of the sieging warship that had an astonishing size and weight was forcefully pushed over 30 m away by the ferocious force. Another sharp beast-like roar came out. Chapter 8:20. Tang Tian ran to the top of the wall in one breath, and could see the majestic three-spirit city. He gasped for breath, not because he was tired, but because he was excited, an indescribable excitement. He opened up his arms as though he wanted to embrace the bronze city. Little brats, your good days are here. The people who were gathered immediately scattered like birds, all of them acting as though they were working. Only when Big Sis comes back will we know. No. Everyone seemed to have awoken from a dream. The laughter that resonated throughout Three Spirits City caused everyone to stop what they were doing. Da-da-da. But no one expected that Big Sis would be the first to ask about Monster. Dooku suppressed the excitement in his heart. The sacred Saint Galaxy had appeared in his dreams countless of times, but when it was truly in front of him, everything felt so surreal. The people around him were all extremely excited. How long do we need to build 10,000 monsters? Sai Lei rushed in like a gust of wind. Her face was filled with confidence. Upon entering, she immediately asked, "How many monsters do we have?" The young and inexperienced youth of the past was now a king. He saw fighting spirit, saw hope, saw himself, and saw everyone. The current Three-Spirit City was like a volcano that could erupt at any time. After 10,000 years of slumber, it had accumulated too much energy. Could not wait to show its voice and could not wait to display its power. You guys have to hurry and get used to it. Zhong Libai glanced at them and reminded them, just like how we used to adapt to laws in the past, from now on, it will not be smooth sailing. Everyone started to come up with a plan. It was a joke, but at the moment it was extremely fitting. A smile that was as dazzling as the sun formed a ripple that continued to spread. Tang Tian placed his hands on his waist, facing the sky. He laughed heartily. Stop all the projects, Sai Lei said without any hesitation. That's right, endless fighting spirit. She wanted to use this seemingly impossible method to tell Tang Tian that no matter what danger he encountered, they would become his strongest support. About 5 times. When Kong said, yes, everyone answered loudly. The desolate continent was extremely desolate as far as the eye could see. It was an endless red soil plain. Duke's expression relaxed. He was extremely confident in himself. This was indeed an almost impossible task. The laboratory was a group of mechanical spirit weapon fanatics. All of them had researched on monster and had benefited greatly from it. She let Tang Tian see, after the development of 3 Spirit City, the power it contained. A few seconds later, deafening cheers pierced through the clouds. That way. When Kong Bai pointed forward. His face was pale and he looked dispirited. The experiences of the past few days were like a nightmare, quickly destroying his will that had been worn away for many years. He was eloquent and familiar with the country and would be a suitable guide. Tang Tian's chest surged. He had experienced countless hardships, dangers, and desperate situations. How could he not be excited when he saw this scene? The silhouettes of the youths, the sparkling sweat that dripped like rain under the light, the stubbornness and unyieldingness on their faces, and the burning flames in their eyes. Only by running could he vent the excitement in his heart. He did not stop. He jumped onto the city wall and sprinted along it. Although he knew that being weak was only temporary, he still felt aggrieved for someone as prideful as him. Winter had passed and spring was just around the corner. Sighs and sighs surfaced in Tang Tian's heart as though it was a lifetime ago. If all the projects are stopped, it will roughly take a month. The assistant estimated. The wind whistled past his ears. Amidst the exclamations, the young man acted as though no one was around, passing through one training ground after another. Passing through the lights, he ran to his heart's content. Inside the mechanical laboratory, everyone was beaming with joy. That's right, there are also those workshops that can help us produce. We can temporarily hire some mechanical engineers to assemble or assist us. Upon thinking about that, Zhong Libai's chest tightened. Duke's expression congealed. The excitement from reaching the sacred Saint Galaxy had disappeared. Now that the master had returned safely, the higher-ups of Ursa Major Constellation who had long been shocked rushed over to 3 Spirit City. It was still the familiar formula and the familiar smell. Ha 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 ha. It will take roughly 2 months. We have many projects on hand. Monster. It was outstanding in all aspects, but in 3 Spirit City, it was still not the mainstream. It lacked the possibility to develop further, and changing its structure was far more difficult than becoming a strong martial spirit. It could be a good supplement, but was unable to become the main mechanical spirit weapon. The laboratory was silent. Everyone looked at Big Sis in a daze. The Ursa Major Constellation's recent situation was not good, and everyone was feeling depressed. Although the master had just returned, but the depressed atmosphere had been swept away, and everyone was filled with confidence for the future. The desolate continent's energy concentration was low, and he was already not used to it. The energy that was everywhere made him feel as though he was immersed in water, and the feeling of estrangement was everywhere. If even he was like that, then the other people's fighting strength would be even weaker. Without fighting strength, they would not be able to establish themselves in the sacred Saint Galaxy, much less follow Tang Tian's footsteps. That's impossible. The adjutant shook his head. He and Yechio had discussed about the army's fate, but no one cared much about it. Although the Sin Domain army was strong, but the cards in their hands were only strong. The God Armor army and the Null division were both strong, and the only weak was the Zhong division led by Zhong Libai. We can ask Screw. During the era of the Southern Cross army, how did they handle such situations? Monster's structure is simple, and the difficulty in producing it is not high. We can entrust the other mechanical engineers in the city to produce it, and that will shorten our production period. They had finally returned to the Sacred Saint Galaxy. This is the Sacred Saint Galaxy? He was like a gust of wind but more like a ray of light, piercing through the layers of dark clouds, through the whistling cold wind, through the dense fog and through the despair. Everyone started to discuss. Tang Tian's return made everyone feel as though a huge rock had been lifted off their hearts. There was no news from the master and Big Sister's temper was terrible. Like a barrel of gunpowder, she would explode at the slightest touch. That was normal in the history of the Ursa Major constellation. Tang Tian had never disappeared for such a long period of time. Master is finally back. When Master is not around, it always makes us feel uneasy. One after another, the brightly lit training grounds were bustling with activity, with shouts and shouts coming out endlessly. One after another, stubborn faces covered in perspiration. One after another, figures were running with all their might. There were heavy thuds coming out from falling down and sparks flying out from clashes. Which direction is the Whitefields continent? Zhong Libai asked. The hurried sound of high heels caused everyone to tremble. Big Sister is back. I'm back. But her heart was filled with fighting spirit. The young man who opened up his arms looked around the entire city, and just like in the past he announced to the world. Every single guest that had just arrived at Three Spirit City had an extremely profound feeling. On the road, everyone's faces were brimming with an indescribable light aura. They were filled with fighting spirit, like flames, emitting light and heat. Sai Lei's eyes flashed with a strange light aura, to produce 10,000 mechanical spirit weapons in a week. When she heard Tang Tian's request, she almost thought that she had heard wrongly. But after hearing Tang Tian's explanation of Bing's plan, she was enlightened. He did not waste any time and anxiously started. Taking a deep breath, he suddenly thought about the mountain peak outside of Star Wind City in the past, and how he was shouting at the valley to encourage himself. The dream that had been soaked in the blood of countless of their ancestors had finally been completed by their hands. Everyone looked at each other. They finally realized that it was a death mission, and their hearts immediately trembled. Sai Lei nodded her head expressionlessly. Split up, we need to seize the time now. How much higher is the energy concentration in the Whitefields continent? Zhong Libai continued to ask. Return to the Sacred Saint Galaxy. Zhong Libai laughed. He was just giving them a friendly reminder. The Sin Domain army led by the Du siblings had only joined them for a short period of time, and both parties had yet to reach a level of trust. Zhong Libai strode forward with a sinister smile on his face. The familiar bronze door was majestic and dignified, and the city walls seemed to have become taller. Sigh, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. 10,000 sets. Three Spirits City. A brilliant smile surfaced on Tang Tian's face. Do you have any objections? Sai Lei raised his eyebrows, his gaze as sharp as swords. The only thing he could do now was to continue training the group of idiots before the master sent the mechanical spirit weapons over. What made him feel comforted was that compared to Laws, he was much more familiar with mechanical spirit weapons. Desolate continent. Don't tell me it's impossible. Sai Lei turned around, his face as gloomy as water, and said word by word, what I want to hear is how to do it. Everyone's attention was immediately attracted. Monster was the mechanical spirit weapon that Screw had helped Colin create. It looked extremely ugly, and its style was vastly different from the mechanical spirit weapons that they had designed. Monster's design truly had many redeeming qualities, for example its simple structure, sturdy skin, low maintenance costs, and most importantly, it was suitable for martial artists with weak martial spirits. Roughly 900 sets. A staff member immediately replied. I wonder what trouble Master has encountered for him to disappear for so long. But the young lad's heart, determination and passion had never changed. Duke took a deep breath. He tried his best to calm the excitement in his heart and spoke. We will definitely do our best. An extremely powerful and astonishing power. We can get Colin and the rest to help. They have specialized in repairing and can help to a certain extent. It was as though there was a fire burning in his chest. The blood in his entire body was boiling, welcoming the bright lights, welcoming the training grounds that was filled with sweat. Welcoming the majestic bronze door, he started to run. That's right, this is great. As long as Master is fine, who can be our opponent? He needed to find a way, and on this point he was duty-bound to do so. He was the #1 man in Sin Domain, and in terms of understanding of power, no one could compare to him, and he was the most likely person to solve the problem. We can also use the old mechanical weapons in the Southern Cross Army's military equipment warehouse. As long as we modify them to a certain extent, We can use them directly and the style is very compatible. Nothing had changed much from before. That's right, with Master's temper he will definitely beat them up until their mothers can't recognize them. Under the lights it was extremely clear. Humph, those people from the Honorable Martial Alliance are going to be unlucky this time. It's too long. Sai Lei said, we only have a week. Chapter 8:21. Pisces constellation suddenly had a coup, and announced that they were joining Temple. When everyone understood what had happened, all of their eyes turned red without saying a word, they buried their heads and started to work. Seeing everyone excited, Gui Yuan's heart was moved. She suddenly bowed. I'll have to trouble everyone. After a short moment of silence, the hall once again exploded. All of the mechanical engineers who were usually cultured and refined were all enraged. All of their faces and necks flushed red, their eyes red. Gui Yuan's heart trembled. She felt that the paper in her hands was burning hot like a piece of metal. She quickly regained her senses and said anxiously, this subordinate will go now. Gui Yuan did not say anything. Qian Xin then expanded the scale and recruited a few more mechanical engineers, and currently Qianji Mechanical Workshop had 20 mechanical engineers. Although it was not considered a big workshop in Three Spirit City, it was considered to be famous. Everyone's ears perked up. The higher the grade of the mission, the more contribution points they could earn. Pai Pa smiled and continued to bury her head in her work. Pai Pa, who had been writing, quickly stopped and raised her head. The image of a young man appeared in her mind. Everyone was startled again. Monster was not a high-end mechanical spirit weapon. Ever since Screw had invented Monster, it was not valued in the mechanical army of Ursa Major Constellation, but outside, it was extremely popular, and was a classic example of a flower growing inside the wall. That was not strange. Ursa Major Constellation's mechanical army was hailed as the temple of mechanical martial artists, and had no lack of talented mechanical martial artists. Mechanical spirit weapons that were biased towards less talented mechanical martial artists did not have much use. The hall, which was originally as quiet as death, became even more deathly still. The first urgent mission was already strange, and it was the first time a high-grade mission had appeared, adding that it was Master Tang Tian's first mission. Purchasing Monster Mechanical Spirit Weapons, unlimited quantity, time limit 1 week. Three Spirit City was either filled with fanatical mechanical engineers, or people who loved to fight, and Pai Pa was the one who started all the internal affairs. But with the increasing workload, she had no choice but to increase the number of subordinates, and Gui Yuan was one of them. Sai Lei and the rest were more interested in researching mechanical techniques. The current market of mechanical spirit weapons was huge, and it was not something that any one of them could swallow up. Three Spirit City only produced high-grade mechanical spirit weapons. The high-end market had high profits and did not require much manpower. As for the middle and low-end markets, they were open to the other workshops in Three Spirit City. Inside the workshop, a young man with skin as dark as charcoal was concentrating on cutting bronze armor pieces. He was Qian Sen's son Qian Lian. Qian Hua's expression was focused. His movements were as smooth as flowing water, pleasing to the eye. Temple's accumulated strength swept away the lethargy, and became even more overbearing. Everyone chatted in groups of 3 to 5, mostly discussing the sudden return of the godlike lad. Their current lives were much better than before. The profession of mechanical engineer had gone from being ignored in the past to being a hot commodity now, and it was all because of this godlike young man. Amongst them, many of them had arrived at Three Spirit City a long time ago, and knew how Three Spirit City had grown. It was night, and the gray sky of Three Spirit City was dyed red by the bright red bronze liquid. One by one, the workshops were brightly lit, rumbling throughout the night, sparks flying everywhere. Three Spirit City was as bright as day, the frigid winter was dispelled and the heat waves surged like summer. Everyone looked at each other. Was this still the stingy Qianxin they knew? The highest grade. Pai Pa, who did not even raise her head, spat out the 3 words without hesitation. It was no longer as easy to earn a living in Three Spirit City as before. With the gathering of many mechanical engineers, the competition had become much more intense. And the officials of Three Spirit City had unlocked the principles of the mechanical spirit weapons, immediately triggering a whole new revolution in mechanical techniques. The concept of martial spirits caused endless changes in mechanical techniques, and also allowed the mechanical engineers to see a whole new world. The bronze hall was in an uproar and the sound waves exploded out. There was a problem with today's mission. But although the techniques were free, not everyone could obtain them. The officials of Three Spirits City had a strict method of calculating contribution points, and when the contribution points reached a certain value, they would be able to exchange for corresponding techniques. Until Tang Tian returned, the oppressive atmosphere of the night before the storm suddenly disappeared without a trace. It was as though everyone blindly believed that Tang Tian would have a way, conquering the 12 ecliptic palaces, and merging them into an unprecedented super constellation, Honorable Martial Constellation. Damn it, we need to let those brats see our power. Did someone beat us up? I have no way to help you fight, I can only use my own method to fight alongside you. This situation after Temple digested the Aquarius constellation, Taurus constellation and Aries constellation, it became even more obvious. They started to attack, and in the short span of a few months, they had consecutively fought a few big battles, with more wins than losses, allowing the entire Heaven's Road to witness Temple's terror. Using contribution points to exchange for new ideas and techniques, they strengthened themselves, and then using their own matured techniques to support the various workshops, raising their standards and lowering their costs. If you lack bronze, come to my warehouse. Everyone stop wasting time. A third of the 12 ecliptic palaces had fallen into Temple's hands. The continuous coups made the other ecliptic palaces' constellations feel insecure, as though Temple's spies were everywhere. Large-scale purges and internal strife erupted in a few ecliptic palaces' constellations. How can I let you fight alone? Let's go. We'll start now. But to ordinary mechanical martial artists, these simple, cheap, easy to maintain and outstanding fighting strength mechanical spirit weapons were the best equipment. Other than being ugly, there were no other flaws. The immense pressure enveloped everyone's heart. The hatred between Ursa Major Constellation and Temple could not be erased. No problem. Isn't it just, monster? You can have as many as you want. All sorts of strange ideas, all sorts of different experiments, all sorts of different types of mechanical spirit weapons sprung up like bamboo shoots after the rain. A daring mechanical engineer shouted out, "Miss Longan, what's the grade of the mission this time?" "It's an urgent order." Pai Pa's tone was normal. And Temple, who had completed the merging of the 4 palaces, announced the establishment of the Honorable Martial Constellation. In the history of Three Spirit City, there had never been such a high-grade mission. Everyone's eyes were all attracted to the martial artist who was hanging the mission plate. The current Heaven's Road was filled with the flames of war, and the land was scarlet for 1,000 Li Qianxin stumbled out of the bronze hall, his mind filled with the word war. He had his own mechanical workshop, Qianji Mechanical Workshop. Qianxin came to Three Spirit City earlier, and at that time the prices of the shops there were not even half of what they were now. Three Spirit City had become the holy land for mechanical engineers, as close to 70% of the mechanical engineers were gathered there. And almost every mechanical engineer would come here to learn. All of the mechanical engineers were quick-witted people, and someone immediately asked, "Is there a war?" In a sense, the mechanical engineers of Three Spirit City and Three Spirit City had a symbiotic relationship. To be able to fight alongside a simple-minded person who never knew fear was actually a good thing. But how could such a mission be of the highest grade? This grand plan had conquered the entire temple, and Clan Elder and started to take control of temple. Liu Yaji's Saint Blood Army, Shan's White Leaf Army, became the 2 sharpest blades in his hands. The ambitious Clan Elder and started to make bold and decisive changes to temple. Gui Yuan tried her best to maintain a calm tone, but she also knew what kind of reaction those 3 words would bring. Three Spirit City's bronze hall was a classic Southern Cross style, with 12 thick and heavy bronze pillars supporting a 30 m tall dome. With simple and crude patterns, it made the place look extremely beautiful. Pai Pa did not even raise her head as she continued to write. Her face was no longer as pale as before, but had the youthful rosy glow of a young lady. Her body condition was improving day by day, but along with it came the increasing workload. Put up this order. Pai Pa still did not raise her head. Three Spirit City's acceptance of monster was already strange enough, but from the looks of it the demand was huge. Watching the difference in strength between the 2 parties as time passed, the gap continued to widen. The unprecedented pressure enveloped everyone's heart. The one who made the decision was the weak Pai Pa, They actually dare to make a move against us. They must be tired of living. Monster? Everyone's faces were filled with unease, anger, and fear. The bronze hall was filled with people. All of their faces were filled with joy, as most of them were mechanical engineers. No one thought that Tang Tian would have any ideas, other than shouting, "Hey hey, everyone, let's chop them to death." They reckoned he would not be able to think of any other ideas. It was easy to feel that one had become braver. Master. A young lady stood respectfully with her hands by her side, waiting for Pai Pa's orders. A group of workers walked into the hall with Gui Yuan at the front, and the clamor immediately became much quieter. The honorable martial constellation with the 4 palaces as one had an unprecedented energy concentration, which was twice that of the ecliptic palace constellations. Currently, with the birth of a brand new mechanical spirit weapon, it was no longer as sensational as before. The experienced and knowledgeable mechanical engineers were naturally much more picky. What truly attracted them was the new technology that 3 Spirit Cities officials regularly released. Whoever gets the order today will be the host. These technologies to 3 Spirit City were already not considered the newest technology, but to the freelance mechanical engineers, it was still advanced enough. The highest grade. I heard that the godlike young lad is back? That's great. We have to celebrate tonight. What about the order? One of the mechanical engineers blurted out. The other mechanical engineers immediately came to their senses with so many monster. Other than using it for war, there was no other reason. Although no one knew why the master needed monster, which was not considered a top-grade mechanical spirit weapon, but with such a huge demand, such an urgent demand, it made everyone feel uneasy. Being in charge of the internal affairs of 3 Spirit City, she knew and felt far more than the average person. Although in this period of time 3 Spirit City was calm and peaceful, but the undercurrents were surging, the people's hearts were anxious, and everyone was just pretending to be calm. But when they saw that heartless smiling face and listened to his nonsense, the shadow that shrouded everyone's hearts would disappear without a trace. Dong dong dong, someone knocked on the door. He clapped his hands and called for everyone, his tone unprecedentedly serious. Everyone, stop whatever you are doing from today onwards, focus on producing monster. With this move, he immediately gathered close to 90% of the mechanical workshops in 3 Spirit City. Such a terrifying energy concentration meant that the martial artists' training efficiency was many times that of the ecliptic palace constellations. As long as they were given time, they would produce countless of gold-ranked martial artists and saints, and the honorable martial constellation would grow to a terrifying state. Yes, we have to celebrate. Tonight I will be the host. Qian Sen's face revealed a smile. Qian Lian's talent was much better than his. Qianji Mechanical Workshop would definitely flourish in Lianer's hands. Please come in. When Crazy Tang was gesticulating and describing his experiences, she just quietly listened by the side. Pai Pa knew it was not like that. However, no one would have thought that the Divine Temple, who had put on such an overbearing appearance, would actually play such a brilliant trick. He took a deep breath. The cold winter air caused him to sober up. His face suddenly flushed red like he was drunk, his fists clenched tightly. He suddenly increased his pace and rushed back to his family's workshop. It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back. It's rare to have a few good days without the godlike young lad around. My heart will always feel uneasy. His son Qian Lian had once unintentionally obtained a special alloy formula. It was this alloy formula that earned Qianji Mechanical Workshop many envious contribution points. And Qianji Mechanical Workshop had used their contribution points to exchange for a few craftsmanship, causing their mechanical spirit weapons standard to increase greatly, and their sales to increase. It was all these enticing actions like an invisible net that had caught all the mechanical engineers in 3 Spirit City. There were no lack of people with sharp eyes among the mechanical engineers. They naturally saw through 3 Spirit Cities' intentions, but that did not stop them from throwing themselves into it. Everyone was startled. The bronze hall became silent. Pay the penalty fee. Qiansen felt extremely calm. Temple's momentum was unstoppable. If we were to say, a mature craftsmanship meant profits to a mechanical workshop. Then if one's contribution points reached a certain level, they could even listen to a grandmaster's lecture, which was undoubtedly the dream of any mechanical engineer. This subordinate will do it immediately. Gui Yuan's heart immediately trembled. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "What grade is the order?" Master had just returned and he immediately released such a mission? Gui Yuan looked around as though she did not see the doubts on everyone's faces and said calmly, "This mission was personally released by Master Tang Tian." Gui Yuan was surprised. "Master, there are still 2 more days before the new order." Upon hearing that there would be a mission, all the mechanical engineers in the various workshops ran over. Three Spirit City had always released missions on a fixed day. To suddenly inform everyone that there was a mission, it was definitely an urgent mission. Urgent missions meant more contribution points. Bronze spirit nuclei are not worth much. I will pile them at the shop entrance. Whoever finishes using them, take them. That's a good idea. It's settled then. A week's time, no wonder it was an urgent mission. Chapter 8:22. Oh, this is a good opportunity to show off. This little girl is really tactful. Everyone was startled. Near the star door that led to the Sin domain, the outline of a city gradually formed. It was the exit of the Sin domain, a place that the strategists fought over, and the bridgehead that connected the Sin domain to the outside world. Initially, Du Xian and the others thought that it would be good enough if they could pass through the Sin door. They never thought that they would be able to occupy the Sin door. This place must be defended. The sea of energy there is vast and boundless. It is a sea where all kinds of energy of different attributes gather. Let's see if we can get a big one then. The more Tang Tian thought about it, the more excited he became. In addition to star stones, there are also secret treasures. We can take a batch of secret treasures there, absorb the energy there, and then send them back. This kind of power will definitely increase by a few levels. Pai Pa's expression was calm. This was not the first time they had discussed this topic. A battleship that consumed hundreds to thousands of top-grade star stones a day was simply unimaginable. After squinting at the little girl for a long time, Tang Tian felt his chest tighten. Hey, that's all you got? Where was the applause? Where was the praise? Where is the worship? Tang Cho was the first to react. He had been to the Sacred Saint Galaxy before, but he had never thought of using such a method to solve the problem. There was no strategy, no setup. It was completely simple and crude, which really suited the style of the crazy young man. But as time passed, he found it increasingly strenuous. Don't worry. Sai Lei raised her head, a trace of pride on her gorgeous face. I definitely won't let you down. They are researching on how to use energy. Du Xinyu pointed to the sky far away from the city. Maybe we can consider forming an alliance. Pai Pa said, Lion King Leong is currently doing that. Tang Tian said proudly, this place doesn't have it, but the sacred region does. Tang Chao's face became gloomy. He was still used to calling the honorable martial constellation as temple. He was overseeing Heaven's Road, commanding the entire situation, and on the battlefield he was not at a disadvantage, even against the White Leaf Army and the Saint Blood Army. This speed and efficiency shocked Tang Tian and made him secretly speechless. Looking at the energetic Sin domain people, Tang Tian could not help but sigh in his heart. Previously he felt that the Sin domain people lacked courage and thought that the majority of them did not have any desire to return to the Sacred Saint Galaxy, but now he realized that he was wrong. It was hard for him to link the passionate Sin domain people with the previously cowardly Sin domain people. Tang Tian coughed lightly. Where are Duke and the rest? Only then did Tang Tian notice a group of black dots floating in the air more than 10 miles away from the city. Suddenly lightning flashed and thunder rolled around them. Suddenly there were explosions of fire and suddenly there were strong gales. Our reputation is not enough, they will not listen to us. Tang Cho said coldly, compared to losing the initiative, I would rather fight with Temple now. There were many types of mechanical spirit weapons that were stronger than Monster in 3 Spirit City, but she never thought that Tang Tian would actually choose such a mechanical spirit weapon. Now that they heard that he wanted to go deep into the honorable martial continent, they became even more worried. Can Monster take up such a heavy responsibility? Tang Tian did not realize that he was not much older than Du Xinyu, and wanted to think of a better name, but after thinking for a long time he squeezed out a sentence. This is the desolate continent, let's call it Desolate City. When Du Xinyu saw Tang Tian, she floated over and bowed. Master, you're back? Pai Pa bowed slightly. It's ready. Desolate continent. You are too insensible. But he did not take the initiative and threw the plan to Tang Tian. It was not difficult to take over an ecliptic palace constellation. but it meant that the Ursa Major constellation's external strategy had completely changed, and only one person had the qualifications to make such a decision, and that was Tang Tian, the man who decided the fate of the world. Then I'll go back first. Tang Tian turned and asked Pai Pa, is everything prepared? Only by winning the battle, turning the impossible into the possible, an unprecedented battle that would attract the attention of the world, was it made for the godlike young lad. Time is of the essence. Du Xinyu said sternly, Master, the city has not been named yet. I hope that Master can give it a name. A light flashed past his mind and Tang Tian muttered to himself, I think I understand. The Honorable Martial Constellation's energy concentration is high, so our training speed cannot compare to others, right? On the other hand, as long as we can increase everyone's training speed, we will not be left behind, right? To increase our training speed, let me think, energy concentration, inheritance, hard work. We cannot compare to them in energy concentration, but inheritance, hard work, everyone is about the same. Then what else can we increase our training speed? Energy concentration, I have an idea. That is the first step. Tang Tian thought for a moment. For the time being, we will not meet any powerful enemies. By the time the Honorable Martial Continent react, it will already be a period of time later. Since the Honorable Martial Continent has everything, it will save us the trouble of transporting them. When the Sin door was occupied, they suddenly realized that their preparations were not sufficient. As long as they defended the place, the Sin domain would hold the initiative. He had sufficient confidence in taking over an ecliptic palace constellation. All of the Sin domain citizens who saw Tang Tian immediately bowed. It was no longer a secret that the Du family had joined Tang Tian's side. In the eyes of the majority, the Sin domain was led by the Du family, and for the Du family to join Tang Tian's side, it meant that the Sin domain had joined Tang Tian's side. Although the preparations were rushed, but the Du family's power in the Sin domain was unparalleled, and the entire Sin domain was completely mobilized. Countless of resources and materials flowed in like a tide, day and night, endlessly being sent over. When they were in Lupus constellation, due to the insufficient energy concentration, under Bing's guidance, they built many ancient energy houses. And after that, Sai Lei used the energy houses as a base and further developed the training clothes. Even the Ultra Bear egg that was created later on borrowed some of the characteristics of the energy houses. That's not right. Pai Pa said. She shook her head. Then what's the difference between us and Temple? In the current situation, Temple is the target of everyone. No matter how terrible the ecliptic palace constellations are, they are still our allies. As long as we become like Temple, the alliance will crumble. In terms of rallying power, we are still lacking compared to Temple. He had initially planned to cross the Honorable Martial Continent and return to the Southern Alliance to fight alongside everyone. But when Bing's plan came out, he immediately threw that thought to the back of his head. Compared to this plan, the Southern Alliance's battle paled in comparison. Everyone looked at Tang Tian, their faces filled with anticipation. But the first battle was the most important. He used all of his strength to retract his smile and said seriously, Monster, you must definitely think of a way to help me prepare more the better. Suddenly Tang Tian gasped. Upon thinking about that, Tang Tian's mouth opened wide. That's right, you guys are rather fast. Tang Tian coughed lightly. The man who decides victory or defeat. Tang Tian tilted his head and asked, how do we do it? We can give it a try. Tang Cho muttered. But you are currently in the Honorable Martial Continent, how are you going to obtain star rocks? Everyone looked at each other. In theory they could not find any mistakes, but was it truly feasible? We don't have that many star rocks. Tang Cho shook his head. The theory behind the energy room was not complicated, it was to extract the energy from star rocks and increase the concentration of energy in the air. But the higher the concentration of energy, the more star rocks were required. Tang Tian praised himself happily. If he wanted to achieve the concentration of energy of the Honorable Martial Constellation with the 4 palaces as one, the amount of star rocks required was something that the Ursa Major constellation could not afford. Of course we will snatch them. Tang Tian said, in the Honorable Martial Continent's warehouse, star rocks are piled up like a mountain, we can just casually snatch one and we will be rich. An Bing's plan is to let me directly attack the heart of the Honorable Martial Continent, that way we will win. The decisive strike will still depend on this godlike young lad. To be able to return to the sacred Saint Galaxy, it was all because of Tang Tian, and everyone did not reject joining Master Tang Tian's subordinates. How can a godlike young lad waste his time on missions that are not difficult and not flashy enough? Tang Tian had already made up his mind to turn the honorable martial continent upside down. So when Tang Tian returned, he was shocked to find that there was an additional stronghold that was half completed. Sigh, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. They were unable to imagine such a scene. In Heaven's Road, high-grade star rocks were extremely expensive and few in number. Just by relying on monster? Silei could not hold it in anymore. Oh my god, just thinking about it makes me happy. What do? I can't stop. Energy concentration? Tang Tian's eyes lit up. In terms of energy concentration, how can Heaven's Road compare to the sacred Saint Galaxy? Alright, it can be considered as doing a good deed. The energy concentration in the sacred Saint Galaxy is extremely high. High-purity star rocks can be seen everywhere. They are of extremely high grade and cheap. The warships over there use top-grade star rocks to move. Bigger warships require at least a few hundred to 1,000 top-grade star rocks in a day. Tang Tian was eager to try. Thinking about the upcoming battle, he felt his blood boiling. Du Exen, you nodded her head. All right. Sai Lei and Pai Pa looked at each other and laughed. They were filled with confidence. Then we will only be pulled further and further away from them. Tang Chou said, their energy concentration is much higher than ours, the martial artists' training speed is much faster than ours, and they will become stronger and stronger. Entering deep into the enemy's territory alone, overturning the seas and rivers, such a magnificent feat, was truly challenging the limits. Such a flashy thing, only the godlike young lad can do it. Look, at the crucial moment, the godlike young lad is still the most trustworthy. Attack and occupy an ecliptic palace constellation. Tang Chou's eyes flickered with light. It was a plan that he had been planning for a long time. To him, only by expanding at the same pace could he stop Temple from expanding. He was not familiar with the arrangements, but in terms of fighting he was not afraid of anyone. Tang Tian's face was filled with excitement, his eyes lit up. Energy room, we have an energy room. Du Exen, you noticed Tang Tian's gaze and turned, Master, do you have any questions? And following the continuous strengthening of Ursa Major constellation, the energy concentration would quickly increase to the level of an ecliptic palace constellation, and the energy room would gradually lose its use. The Sin domain had been suppressed for too long and had been far away from the sacred Saint Galaxy for too long, although they had returned to the sacred Saint Galaxy. But to them the sacred Saint Galaxy was a completely foreign place and it was hard for them to not be confident. We do not have much time left. Once Temple digests Pisces constellation, the gap between the two sides will quickly widen. We need to make a move. The further we go, the more disadvantageous the situation will be for us. Tang Chou was just a pure military general and his methods outside of the battlefield were lacking. Watching the opponent leisurely completing their arrangements and seeing their own disadvantage getting bigger and bigger, the feeling was extremely terrible. Even Tang Tian felt that Bing's poker face was much more pleasing to the eye. Chapter 8:23. A shout filled with joy immediately caused an uproar. To absorb all the energy in the continent, oh my god, what kind of lunatic would have such a crazy idea and to actually carry it out? Everyone only has one mission, and that is to use the star treasures in your hands to absorb all the energy in the desolate continent. Not a single drop is left. Of course, just relying on the star treasures in your hands is definitely not enough. But it doesn't matter, I will prepare even more star treasures for everyone. 1 week, we only have 1 week. Everyone is in charge of a region and there cannot be any blind spots. Move out. Dooku and the rest quickly thought of a way. They changed the summoning method, and first used the power of the physique to activate the law threads, and then used the law threads to form law surfaces and law domains. But I hope that the desolate city can attract the enemy's attention, and the best would be to attract more armies. Tang Tian said honestly. Everyone looked at him in envy. He trained in light laws, and the densest energy in the place was light energy, so it was not strange for him to be the first to gain enlightenment. Spirit objects, priceless spirit objects, releasing enchanting light auras and beautiful undulations. With that he turned and walked towards the Null Division camp. Du Exen followed without hesitation. Seeing Tang Tian's confident look, her heart was filled with curiosity. To turn the desolate continent into the Sin domain, how can such a ridiculous thing happen? This is too crazy. Most importantly, according to Bing's plan, he wanted to destroy the honorable martial continent from the inside, and needed mobility and could not defend the stronghold. Tang Tian suddenly felt that there was a possibility of defending the desolate city. When Kong pointed to the front, where the valley was faintly discernible. Desolate continent's great transformation plan caused Wen Kong and the rest to pee in their pants. If there was such a stronghold behind them, then it would truly be a thorn in their backs. The honorable martial continent would definitely not be able to tolerate it, and would definitely think of ways to destroy it. Tang Tian's mind seemed to have a flash of inspiration, and he anxiously said, "Repeat what you said just now." The star treasure suddenly lit up with a dazzling light aura, and the surrounding energy surged towards the star treasure in his hands. In the blink of an eye, a gigantic energy vortex formed, causing sand and stones to fly out of the valley, and the other members had no choice but to fly out. The desolate continent's energy was sparse, but that was only in comparison to the sacred Saint Galaxy. Its energy concentration was much higher than the constellations in Heaven's Road. But under the crazy absorption of the star treasures, in just the first day, the desolate continent's energy concentration dropped by 20%. In that moment, Wen Kong seemed to have seen the entire desolate continent covered in dazzling light coins. There's a valley in front. It should meet the requirements. What we lack the most is time. Tang Tian said honestly, "We'll be leaving in a week. Heaven's Road and the Southern Alliance are currently facing huge pressure." Which sentence? Du Xinyu was stunned, but she immediately repeated what she had just said. The lower realm Sin domain martial artists used the power of the physique to activate the law threads, and as the law threads were directly connected to their flesh and blood, they received the least influence. And for Sin domain martial artists who had gained enlightenment on law surfaces, their power originated from the projection of their law surfaces, and the law surfaces were not connected to their flesh and blood, thus the energy produced an intense reaction. Law domain martial artists were the same. Previously he did not have high hopes for the desolate city, although the energy in the desolate city was sparse, but it was not the Sin domain. The honorable martial continent's martial artists were weakened, but the Sin domain's martial artists were weakened even more. Compared to that, defending the Sin door was much easier. As long as they destroyed the honorable martial stronghold, the Sin door would be no different from the other places in the Sin domain, and honorable martial artists would be courting death if they entered. That also meant that the desolate city could attract a large number of armies. If the desolate city attracted a large number of armies, then wouldn't the honorable martial continent's hinterland be even emptier? Floating in the air, they were either meditating, standing still, dancing with joy, or chanting. All of them were different. He watched on with a blank mind, watching the mountain of star treasures being distributed to the Null Division members one by one. With each person holding one, Wen Kang's brain had completely lost the ability to think. He was called to the Null Division to be their guide. Since he had already surrendered, he did not have any heart to resist, so he decided to be their guide. But when he stepped into the Null Division's camp, it was as though he was struck by a technique. He was dumbstruck. At his fingertip, a soybean-sized light spot lit up, releasing a gentle orange light aura. He gently waved his finger and countless of orange light spots sprinkled down. It was a beautiful sight. The light spots were like rain, surging and changing, causing people to be dazzled. Only a godlike young lad can think of such a genius idea. The first thing they needed to overcome was the interference of energy on their laws of perception. At this point, Duke's guess was wrong. The interference of energy on laws of perception was everywhere, and the higher the realm, the greater the influence. But Duke's understanding of laws far surpassed others, and when he realized the unique phenomenon, he thought about it and understood the crux of it. The pain only lasted for a second, and they were all shocked silly by Tang Tian's plan. Even they did not understand it was obviously not theirs, but why did they feel the pain? Even the usually calm Du Xinyu at that moment was dumbstruck. Everyone's morale was roused. For one person to succeed, it meant that they were on the right path. I found it. There was no one in the valley, not even a blade of grass grew. No one knew how many years it had been since a human appeared. Other than him, the Sin Domain army contained more than half of the elites of the Sin Domain, and more than half of the top 10 in the list of powerhouses. All of them were geniuses who had gone through countless of cruel trials. When so many elites gathered together and worked together, he was looking forward to the results. Duke's confidence was not without reason. Then we can give up on the desolate city and focus on defending the Sin door. Du Xian, you said calmly. This is not the Sin domain, we can turn it into the Sin domain. Du Xian, you had a look of suspicion, she did not understand what was wrong with his words. This is not the Sin domain. Everyone were so frightened that they looked like quails that were being strangled. Du Xian, you had obviously thought about this problem and spoke calmly. Defending the desolate city is actually not difficult, we only need a certain amount of time. When Big Brother and the rest find a way to control the energy, the desolate city will be hard to break through. With the advantage of defending the city, we will be able to obtain the endless support of the Sin domain, and we will be able to sleep peacefully. That's crazy. Du Xian was startled, she thought that she had heard wrongly and asked, turn the desolate continent into the Sin domain? The third batch, the fourth batch. That's impossible. Du Xian shook her head and regained her composure. Du Xian roughly understood Tang Tian's meaning, she thought for a moment, then shook her head. That's not realistic. If we do not break through, we will lack the ability to fight against the honorable martial continent. The desolate city is a Sin domain type stronghold, although it can be of use, but its usefulness will be greatly reduced. This is not the Sin domain. Go there. Liang Qiu did not speak any nonsense and immediately brought his group and rushed into the valley. But when all of these priceless spirit objects appeared in piles, like small mountains, the impact it brought was unparalleled. He could not think of any profound plans, but after thinking about it he felt that it was a good idea. How can we make the desolate city impregnable? Du Xian was not surprised. As an outstanding general, she knew that the loss of a city was not important, but the victory of the entire situation was the true crux. Once they moved out and left the desolate continent, it would definitely alert the honorable martial continent, and the desolate city would then enter the sights of the honorable martial continent. For a full half an hour, Wen Kong and the rest sunk into a strange silence. When they gradually regained their senses, the mountain of spirit objects had disappeared, and for no reason they felt a heart-wrenching pain. Tang Tian said happily, you will know when the time comes. When Du Xian said, this is not the Sin domain, Tang Tian suddenly clapped his hands, his face revealing an uncontrollable joy. That's right, this is not the Sin domain. He wasn't the only one. His former teammates who had come with him had the same reaction. And all of these talented elites started to think about how to use laws to control energy. It was a vast project, the types of laws were as vast as the ocean, and the attributes of energy were as complicated as the stars. If we were to say that laws were a key, then they needed to find the corresponding lock. The concentration of energy in the desolate continent was dropping at a speed visible to the naked eye. Scratching his chin, Tang Tian racked his brains with a thieving look in his eyes. Ka. It was as though he could hear the countless of rusty gears in his head releasing a teeth-aching sound, the rust falling like snow. But after a long period of hard work, the heavens did not disappoint those who persevered. He thought of a brilliant idea. Hand the problem to the smart people. When Kong looked at the energy vortex that resembled a storm and became absent-minded. Where did this group of people come from? Tang Tian's words shocked him to death. That's right. Tang Tian was extremely pleased with his brilliant idea. The truth proved that his judgment was correct and they quickly had a breakthrough. He turned and asked Du Xian, how do you think we can defend the desolate city? But seeing the Sin domain armies break through, Tang Tian started to consider the possibility. But what made them even crazier was that the second batch of star treasures had arrived. The Null Division were like beams that were scattered. Carrying the star treasures, they ran towards every corner of the desolate continent. One after another, energy vortexes appeared endlessly in the vast desolate continent. The thin energy in the desolate continent caused the interference to be less intense, greatly reducing the time they had to explore. Tang Tian looked at the energy undulations released by the light dots in the distance, and could not help but scratch his chin. The undulations are not weak, he pondered for a moment, then understood. Using laws to control energy, it will yield twice the results with half the effort. And all of these people have a deep understanding of laws. Upon finding the knack, their fighting capabilities will soar. Tang Tian scratched his chin, his eyes releasing a thieving light. That makes sense. Liang Qiu quickly chose a location and took out a star treasure. It was a Pisces constellation silver star treasure. Two extremely lifelike silver fishes were connected head to tail as though they were swimming. For the sake of not affecting the construction of the stronghold, they stayed far away from the star door. They were able to use the power of laws at the initial stage, allowing them to float in the air, but to be able to fly as freely as before, they still had a long way to go. In the vast desolate continent, a group of people flew,